Daniel Hayes stood frozen outside room 14, his mop handle trembling in his grip. Through the small window, he watched the respected physician lean over the dying child's IV line, with movements too deliberate, too careful. The chemical residue on his gloves caught the fluorescent light for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs because he recognized that compound. He'd spent 7 years studying toxins before his career imploded. The little girl wasn't dying from disease. She was being murdered, and the killer wore a white coat everyone trusted. If you want to see how a janitor stops a killer nobody suspects, stay until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The fluorescent lights of Whitmore Medical Center's private wing hummed their endless monotone symphony at 2:47 a.m. Daniel Hayes pushed his janitorial cart down the polished corridor, the wheels squeaking against tiles so clean they reflected his worn face back at him like a tired ghost. 32 years old and invisible to everyone who mattered. Just another guy in a gray uniform emptying trash bins while the real world slept. He stopped outside room 14, the same room he'd cleaned every night for the past 6 weeks. Through the rectangular window in the door, he could see the small form lying motionless in the hospital bed. Ava Bennett, 8 years old, dying from something nobody could name. Daniel pulled out his key card and swiped it across the reader. The lock clicked open with its familiar beep. He stepped inside quietly, careful not to disturb the monitors that blinked and beeped their constant vigil. The room smelled like every other hospital room he'd cleaned over the past 3 years. Antiseptic, artificial, and underneath it all, something sadder. Fear, maybe. Or hope running out. Ava's mother wasn't there tonight. Olivia Bennett usually stayed until midnight before her assistant physically dragged her home for a few hours of sleep. The woman looked like she'd aged a decade in the 6 weeks her daughter had been sick. Daniel had seen that look before, back when his own life was falling apart. Back when he still had a career that mattered. He emptied the small trash bin near the bathroom first. Medical waste went into the red containers that the specialized team handled. Regular trash went into his cart. Simple work, mindless work. The kind of work that didn't require a master's degree in toxicology or 7 years of pharmaceutical research experience. The kind of work you did when you'd been blacklisted from every legitimate scientific institution in the country. Daniel moved to the second trash bin near the window and froze. His hand hovered over the bin liner as his brain caught up with what his nose had already detected. Under the sharp hospital smell, there was something else. Something that didn't belong. A chemical trace so faint most people wouldn't notice it at all. But Daniel wasn't most people. Not really. Not underneath the janitor's uniform. He straightened up slowly and looked around the room with different eyes. The IV stand beside Ava's bed, the monitoring equipment, the tray of medications on the rolling table. His gaze moved across each item methodically, cataloging, analyzing. Old habits dying hard. The IV bag hung innocently from its hook, clear liquid dripping steadily through the tube that disappeared under the white medical tape on Ava's small hand. Standard saline solution. Nothing unusual about that. Except that chemical trace in the air was stronger near the IV stand. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He looked toward the door, then back at the IV setup. This was none of his business. He was a janitor. His job was to empty trash and mop floors and keep his head down so he could keep making the $9, an hour that barely covered rent for the small apartment where his daughter Sophie slept right now, hopefully dreaming about something better than her father's failed life. He grabbed the handles of his cart and started toward the door. Then he stopped. 7 years ago, Daniel had walked away from a laboratory where he'd discovered something wrong, something dangerous. He'd reported it to the right people, followed every proper channel, believed the system would work the way it was supposed to work. Instead, the pharmaceutical company had buried the evidence, destroyed his reputation, and made sure he'd never work in research again. His marriage had collapsed under the pressure. His wife had left, taking their savings and leaving him with Sophie and legal bills he was still paying off. Walking away from problems had destroyed his life once already. He turned back to the room and moved closer to the IV stand. He didn't touch anything. That would be crossing a line he couldn't uncross. But he leaned in slightly, letting his trained senses work. The chemical trace was definitely there. Metallic, organic, synthetic. Something added to the solution that shouldn't be there. His mind started racing through compounds automatically. Heavy metals, alkaloids, synthetic toxins. The trace was too sophisticated to be accidental contamination. This was deliberate, precise. Someone had added something to that IV bag with enough skill that nobody would detect it through normal channels. Daniel stepped back and looked at Ava again. The medical chart hanging on the wall beside her bed listed her symptoms in clinical detail. Progressive neurological decline, unexplained metabolic dysfunction, muscle weakness, cognitive impairment. No diagnosis despite 6 weeks of testing by some of the country's best specialists. Because they were looking for a disease when they should have been looking for a crime. Daniel's hands were shaking now. He gripped the cart handle hard to steady them. This wasn't his problem. He wasn't a scientist anymore. He was a janitor with a daughter to support and a past he was trying to leave behind. Getting involved would put Sophie at risk, would put everything he'd carefully rebuilt at risk. But a child was being poisoned, right in front of everyone, in a hospital, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The door clicked open behind him. Daniel spun around, his heart jumping into his throat. A nurse stepped in, Angela, one of the night shift regulars. She looked at him with mild curiosity. "Everything okay, Daniel?" He forced his breathing to steady. "Yeah, just finishing up. This room always takes a bit longer." He gestured vaguely at the bathroom. "You know how it is? Angela nodded absently, already moving to check Ava's monitors. Poor thing. Mrs. Bennett was here until 11 tonight. Couldn't convince her to leave until her assistant practically carried her out. She adjusted the IV line slightly, her movements routine and professional. Breaks my heart. Such a sweet kid. Daniel watched her hands on the IV equipment. Angela had been a nurse at Whitmore for 12 years. Competent, caring, completely unaware that something was wrong. Because why would she suspect? This was one of the best private medical facilities in the state. The doctors treating Ava were famous. Nobody was looking for poison because nobody expected evil to hide inside white coats and prestigious credentials. "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "Breaks my heart too." Angela finished her check and headed back toward the door. "Have a good night, Daniel." "You too." She left. Daniel stood alone in the room again, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor. Every beat was precious. Every beat was counting down toward something terrible, unless someone stopped it. He looked at Ava one more time. She looked so small in that big hospital bed. Vulnerable. Innocent. Someone had decided this child should die for reasons Daniel didn't understand yet. Someone was slowly murdering her while her mother spent millions trying to save her, and every specialist in the building chased diagnostic ghosts. Daniel pushed his cart toward the door and left the room. He finished his shift methodically, cleaning the rest of the private wing with his usual quiet efficiency. Nobody paid attention to him. Nobody ever did. The janitor was basically invisible, which was exactly how he'd survived the past 3 years. But invisibility had advantages. Janitors went everywhere, saw everything, had access to places and schedules and patterns that nobody thought twice about. At 6 a.m., Daniel clocked out and walked to his car in the employee parking lot. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that looked too beautiful for the ugliness churning in his gut. He sat in his old Honda for a long time, keys in hand, staring at nothing. Then he pulled out his phone and opened a note app. He started documenting everything he'd observed, the chemical trace, the timing, the symptoms. He'd need more information, much more. But he knew how to gather it, how to test it, how to prove it. He also knew what it would cost him if he was wrong, or worse, if he was right and tried to stop it. Daniel drove home through the morning traffic, his mind already working through possibilities. Sophie would be waking up soon. He'd need to make her breakfast, get her ready for school, pretend everything was normal. Pretend her father was just a tired janitor coming home from a night shift, instead of a former scientist who'd just stumbled onto something that could destroy what was left of their precarious life. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been old when he moved in and hadn't improved since. He unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. Sophie was still asleep, her dark hair spread across the pillow, one arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. She looked so peaceful, so safe. Daniel watched her sleep for a moment, feeling the weight of what he knew pressing down on his chest. If he pursued this, if he tried to expose what was happening to Ava Bennett, he'd be putting Sophie at risk again. The first time he'd tried to do the right thing, it had cost him everything. What would it cost this time? But the alternative was knowing a child was being murdered and doing nothing. Sophie's eyes opened sleepily. She saw him standing in the doorway and smiled. "Hi, Daddy." "Hey, sweetheart. Time to get up for school." She stretched and yawned. "Can we have pancakes?" "Sure, pancakes sound good." While Sophie got dressed, Daniel made breakfast in the tiny kitchen, his hands moving automatically while his brain continued working through the problem. He needed to confirm his suspicions first. That meant collecting samples somehow without raising suspicion. It meant accessing medical records he had no business looking at. It meant risks he couldn't afford to take, but couldn't avoid if he wanted to save that little girl. Sophie came out wearing her school uniform, her backpack already on her shoulders. She was 8 years old, exactly the same age as Ava Bennett. That thought hit Daniel harder than he expected. "Daddy, are you okay?" Sophie was looking at him with those perceptive eyes that saw too much sometimes. Daniel smiled and set her plate of pancakes on the small table. "Yeah, honey, just tired. Long night at work." "You're always tired after work." She said it matter-of-factly without complaint, but the observation stung anyway. This wasn't the life he'd wanted for either of them. He was supposed to be making breakthrough discoveries, teaching at universities, changing the world through science. Instead, he was making $9 an hour cleaning up after people who'd never know his name. But at least Sophie was safe. At least they had a roof over their heads and food on the table. At least nobody was trying to destroy them anymore. "Eat your pancakes before they get cold," he said. After dropping Sophie at school, Daniel drove to a small storage unit on the other side of town. He'd rented it 2 years ago when he finally admitted to himself that he couldn't throw away all his old research equipment. The microscope his mentor had given him, the reference books he'd collected over years of study, the testing supplies he'd squirreled away before leaving his last legitimate job. All of it packed into a 10 by 10 space that cost him $60 a month he could barely afford. He unlocked the unit and stood looking at the boxes stacked inside. This was his past, the life he couldn't have anymore. Opening these boxes meant admitting he was still that person underneath the janitor's uniform. It meant risking everything again. Daniel pulled out his phone and looked at the notes he'd made about Ava Bennett. Then he started unpacking boxes. Over the next week, Daniel became 2 different people. During the day, he was the same quiet janitor cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. At night, after his shift ended, he became someone else. Someone who paid very close attention to room 14 and everyone who went in or out. He noted the doctors who treated Ava, the nurses who checked on her, the specialists who came and went with their expensive suits and confident diagnoses that led nowhere. And he started seeing patterns. Dr. Victor Hale was the primary physician overseeing Ava's care. Mid-50s, distinguished, with a reputation that brought wealthy patients from across the country. He personally conducted private examinations 3 times a week, always in the evening, always alone with Ava. And every single time, within hours after Dr. Hale's visits, Ava's condition worsened. The nursing notes documented it clearly if you knew what to look for. Increased confusion, muscle weakness, neurological decline. Daniel began timing his cleaning schedule around Dr. Hale's visits. He noted the trash that came out of room 14 after the doctor left. Syringes wrapped in gauze, empty medication vials, standard medical waste, except for that faint chemical trace that appeared consistently after Dr. Hale's examinations. On the 8th night, Daniel made his move. He waited until Dr. Hale left Ava's room at 9:47 p.m. 15 minutes later, Daniel entered with his cleaning cart. The medical waste bin near the examination table held what he needed, a used syringe wrapped in gauze marked for disposal. Daniel pulled on gloves and carefully extracted it, placing it in a sealed container he'd brought from his storage unit. This was theft of medical waste, possibly a felony, depending on how the hospital wanted to interpret it. If he got caught, he'd lose his job, possibly face criminal charges, definitely destroy any chance of ever working anywhere legitimate again. But the syringe held traces of whatever Dr. Hale had administered to Ava, and Daniel finally had the means to test it. He finished cleaning the room and pushed his cart out into the hallway. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He was committed now. At home after his shift, while Sophie slept, Daniel set up a makeshift lab on the kitchen table. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't even close to proper scientific protocol. But he had enough equipment to run basic analyses, enough knowledge to identify common compounds, enough experience to know what he was looking at when the first test results appeared. The syringe contained traces of Ava's medication, a vitamin supplement prescribed to support her declining metabolic function. But underneath that, hidden with sophisticated precision, was something else. An organometallic compound Daniel recognized from his pharmaceutical research days. A synthetic neurotoxin designed to accumulate slowly in the body, causing progressive neurological damage that would look exactly like a rare metabolic disorder. This wasn't accidental. This was elegant, deadly, deliberate. Daniel sat back in his chair, staring at the test results in the dim kitchen light. His hands had stopped shaking. His mind had gone very clear and cold. Someone was poisoning Ava Bennett with a compound so sophisticated that even the country's best doctors hadn't detected it. Someone with access to advanced pharmaceutical chemistry. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had the skill to hide it inside legitimate medical treatment. Someone like Dr. Victor Hale. But why? Why would a respected physician slowly murder a child? There had to be a motive. Something that made sense even if the act itself was monstrous. Daniel spent the rest of the night researching Dr. Hale's background, his career, his finances. The internet made everyone's life partially visible if you knew where to look. And Daniel had learned a lot about digital research during his years in the wilderness. What he found made his stomach turn. Dr. Hale had financial investments in several biotech companies. Standard stuff for successful doctors. But one name kept appearing in the records. Connections to a venture capital firm that had made aggressive investments betting against Bennett Biotech. Olivia Bennett's company, the billion-dollar empire she'd built from nothing. Daniel dug deeper. The venture capital firm held massive short positions on Bennett Biotech stock. If the company crashed, they'd make hundreds of millions. But Bennett Biotech was strong, profitable, growing. There was no reason it should crash unless something catastrophic happened to its founder. Something like her only child dying from a mysterious illness that destroyed Olivia Bennett's focus, drained her resources, and shattered the confidence investors had in her leadership. If Ava died, Bennett Biotech would collapse, and Dr. Victor Hale would become very, very wealthy. Daniel closed his laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, listening to Sophie breathe softly in the next room. He'd just uncovered a murder plot so elaborate and evil that part of his brain refused to believe it. But the evidence was there. The toxin was real. The motive was clear. A respected doctor was slowly killing a child for money while everyone watched and trusted him to save her. And Daniel was the only person who knew. Dawn broke over the city again. Daniel hadn't slept. He'd spent the hours staring at the evidence he'd compiled, trying to figure out what to do with it. Going to the police would mean explaining how he'd obtained the evidence. Through theft of medical waste, unauthorized testing, and investigation while working as a janitor. They'd laugh him out of the station or arrest him for breaking hospital protocols. Going to the hospital administration would be worse. Dr. Hale was famous. Daniel was nobody. A janitor making wild accusations against a physician whose reputation was bulletproof. They'd fire him and probably blacklist him from every hospital in the state. Going to Olivia Bennett directly was his only option. But approaching a billionaire CEO to tell her that her daughter's trusted doctor was actually a murderer hiding behind sophisticated chemistry, that sounded insane even to Daniel, and he had the evidence. Sophie woke up asking for breakfast. Daniel made eggs and toast, helped her pack her school bag, drove her through morning traffic while his mind kept circling the same impossible problem. How do you expose evil when the evil looks exactly like good? When the murderer wears respect and prestige like armor? At Sophie's school, he watched her run toward the building with her backpack bouncing. She turned at the entrance and waved. Daniel waved back, forcing a smile. She had no idea her father was about to risk everything again. No idea that the safe, quiet life they'd built was about to explode. Because there wasn't really a choice. Not anymore. Daniel drove to Whitmore Medical Center and parked in the employee lot. His shift didn't start for 12 hours, but he needed to see Olivia Bennett before tonight. Before doctor. Hale made his next private visit to room 14 and administered another dose of poison disguised as medicine. He entered through the main lobby, no longer wearing his janitor uniform. Just a regular visitor in jeans and a jacket. Security gave him a casual glance and waved him through. Daniel took the elevator to the private wing and stepped into the corridor he cleaned every night. Through the window of room 14, he could see Olivia Bennett sitting beside her daughter's bed. She was holding Ava's hand, talking quietly. From here, Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he could see the exhaustion in every line of Olivia's body. The weight of watching your child die without understanding why. Daniel stood outside the room for a long time, watching. This was the moment. Once he walked through that door and spoke the words he needed to speak, there was no going back. His life would change again. Maybe for the better, probably for the worse. But staying silent meant watching Ava Bennett die. And Daniel had watched enough terrible things happen while good people stayed silent. He raised his hand to knock on the door. A voice spoke behind him. "Can I help you?" Daniel turned. A nurse was looking at him with polite suspicion. Not Angela, someone from the day shift he didn't recognize. "I need to speak with Mrs. Bennett," Daniel said. "It's important."
"Are you family?" "No, I'm—" He stopped. What was he? A janitor with a theory? A washed-up scientist playing detective?
A nobody trying to warn a billionaire that her trusted doctor was a murderer? "I have information about her daughter's condition." The nurse's expression shifted from polite to protective. "Are you a physician?" "No." "Then I'm going to have to ask you to leave this wing. If you have concerns about a patient, you can submit them through proper channels." Proper channels. The words that had destroyed him once already. Daniel looked back at the window where Olivia Bennett sat holding her dying daughter's hand, and he made a decision that probably counted as professional suicide. He pulled out his phone and opened the photos he'd taken of his test results. He held the screen toward the nurse. "I'm the night janitor on this wing. I have evidence that someone is poisoning Ava Bennett. I need 5 minutes with her mother. That's all. 5 minutes." The nurse stared at him like he'd just announced he was from Mars. "Sir, I'm calling security." "Please." Daniel kept his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "Just show her this note. Tell her a janitor has evidence about the toxin killing her daughter. If she doesn't want to meet with me, I'll leave. But let her decide." The nurse hesitated, clearly trying to decide if he was dangerous or just crazy. Finally, she took his phone and looked at the screen. The chemical formulas probably meant nothing to her, but the word neurotoxin was clear enough. "Wait here," she said. "Don't move." She disappeared into room 14. Through the window, Daniel watched her approach Olivia Bennett, watched Olivia's expression change from confused to alert, watched her stand up and look toward the door. 30 seconds later, Olivia Bennett stepped into the hallway. She was younger than Daniel expected from the news photos. 30 years old, though grief had aged her. Dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Expensive clothes that hung on a frame that had lost weight from stress. But her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently drilling into Daniel like lasers. "You're the janitor." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Daniel Hayes. I need to talk to you about your daughter's treatment, privately." Olivia glanced back at Ava's room, then at Daniel. "You have 2 minutes to explain why I shouldn't have security remove you from this hospital." Daniel took a breath. This was it. The moment where his life either started making sense again or finished falling apart. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the printed summary of his test results, and handed it to her. "Your daughter isn't sick, Mrs. Bennett. She's being poisoned. Someone is administering a synthetic neurotoxin through her IV supplements. It's designed to mimic a metabolic disorder so sophisticated that standard testing can't detect it. But I found it, and I know who's doing it." Olivia stared at the paper in her hands. Her face had gone very pale. You're saying someone in this hospital is deliberately—" "Dr. Victor Hale," Daniel said quietly. "He's poisoning Ava, and I can prove it." Olivia Bennett's hands trembled as she held the paper Daniel had given her. The medical terminology probably meant nothing to her at first glance, but the word neurotoxin stood out like a scream in a silent room. She looked up at Daniel with eyes that held equal parts desperation and suspicion. "Come with me," she said abruptly. She didn't wait for a response. Olivia turned and walked quickly down the corridor toward a door marked Private Consultation Room. Daniel followed, acutely aware of the nurse watching them with an expression that suggested security was still very much on the table. Inside the small room, Olivia closed the door and turned to face him. "You have 5 minutes to convince me you're not insane," she said. "Start talking." Daniel had rehearsed this conversation in his head a dozen times during the sleepless night. Every version had sounded crazy. But now, standing in front of a woman whose daughter was dying, the words came out steadier than he expected. "I'm a janitor here, like you already know. But 7 years ago, I was a toxicology researcher. I worked for Meridian Pharmaceuticals doing advanced chemical analysis. I found evidence they were falsifying safety data on a drug that was killing people. I reported it. They destroyed my career, my reputation, my marriage. Made sure I'd never work in science again.
Olivia's expression didn't change. I don't care about your past. Tell me about my daughter.
Bo? I'm getting there, Daniel said. I clean your daughter's room every night. 3 weeks ago, I noticed a chemical trace in the air near her IV equipment. Something that didn't belong there. At first, I thought it was contamination, maybe improper cleaning protocols, but it kept appearing. Always strongest right after Dr. Hale conducted his private examinations. He watched Olivia's face carefully. She was listening, but he could see the doubt there too. The natural resistance to believing something so terrible about someone she trusted. I started documenting patterns, Daniel continued. Every time Dr. Hale visits your daughter privately, her condition worsens within hours. Every time. The nursing notes confirm it if you check the timestamps. Increased confusion, muscle weakness, neurological decline. It's not random. It's consistent. Correlation isn't causation, Olivia said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Ava's condition is progressive. Of course it worsens over time. Not like this. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened the spreadsheet he'd created. Look at the timeline. Here's when Dr. Hale visits. Here's when the symptoms spike. It's not gradual progression. It's acute deterioration directly following his examinations, and always when he's alone with her. Olivia took the phone and stared at the data. Her jaw tightened. You're telling me Victor Hale, a physician I've known for 2 years, who came highly recommended, who has dedicated his career to saving children, is deliberately killing my daughter? Yes. Why? The word came out sharp and angry. Give me one reason why a respected doctor would do something so monstrous. Daniel had hoped to avoid this part until he had more solid evidence, but there was no gentle way to say it. Money, doctor. Hale has financial connections to a venture capital firm that's betting against your company. If Ava dies, Bennett Biotech crashes. The people Dr. Hale is connected to make hundreds of millions. He gets a cut. For a moment, Olivia just stared at him. Then she laughed. But it was a hollow, bitter sound. That's your evidence? Financial conspiracy theories? Do you understand how insane you sound? I know how it sounds, but I also know what I found in that syringe. Daniel pointed to the paper she was still holding. That's a synthetic neurotoxin called organomercurial compound 7-14. It was developed by Meridian Pharmaceuticals 8 years ago for research purposes. It accumulates in neural tissue slowly, causing damage that looks exactly like a metabolic disorder. Standard blood tests won't detect it because it binds to proteins in a way that masks its presence. You need specialized chromatography to find it. And you just happen to have access to this specialized testing? Olivia's voice dripped with skepticism. I kept my old equipment, the stuff they didn't take when they destroyed my career. Daniel met her eyes steadily. Mrs. Bennett, I know this sounds impossible. I know I look like a janitor making wild accusations, but I spent 7 years studying compounds like this. I know what I found, and I know your daughter is running out of time. Olivia's expression shifted. The skepticism was still there, but underneath it, Daniel saw something else. Fear. The terrible fear of a mother who'd spent 6 weeks watching her child die while experts failed to explain why. The fear of someone who knew, deep down, that she'd trust the wrong person. Show me the rest, she said quietly. All of it. Over the next 20 minutes, Daniel walked her through everything. The chemical analysis, the timing patterns, the financial connections he'd uncovered. He explained how the toxin worked, why it was so hard to detect, how someone with pharmaceutical knowledge could hide it inside legitimate medical treatments. He showed her photos of the test results, the molecular structure, the research papers that documented the compound's effects. Olivia listened without interrupting. She was a CEO who'd built a biotech empire from nothing. She understood scientific data better than most people. And as Daniel laid out the evidence piece by piece, he watched her face transform from skepticism to horror to cold-focused rage. You stole medical waste from my daughter's room, she said when he finished. You conducted unauthorized testing. You investigated a physician without any legal authority. Everything you've just shown me is inadmissible and probably criminal. I know. If you're wrong, I'll destroy you. If you're lying, I'll make sure you never work anywhere again. If this is some kind of extortion attempt, you've made the worst mistake of your life. I know that too. Olivia stood up and paced the small room. Her hands were shaking now, but her voice stayed controlled. If you're right, if Victor Hale is really doing this, then my daughter has been suffering for 6 weeks because I trusted the wrong person, because I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. You had no reason to suspect, Daniel said. Nobody did. That's why it worked. Don't. The word came out sharp. Don't excuse this. If my daughter dies because I was too blind to see the truth, that's on me. Not on Hale. Not on the system. On me. Daniel recognized the voice of someone who blamed themselves for things outside their control. He'd heard it in his own head for years after his career imploded. Mrs. Bennett, we can stop this, but we need to move quickly. If Dr. Hale suspects anyone knows, he'll cover his tracks, change his methods, maybe even accelerate the poisoning. Olivia stopped pacing and looked at him directly. Why are you doing this? You could have stayed silent, kept your job, avoided putting yourself at risk again. Why tell me? Daniel thought about Sophie sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, about Ava Bennett lying in a hospital bed while poison slowly destroyed her, about all the times he'd stayed silent in his life and regretted it afterward. Because a child is dying, he said simply, and I know how to save her. Olivia studied his face for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone. I'm calling my head of security and the FBI. If you're lying to me, they'll handle you. If you're telling the truth, they'll handle Hale. Wait, Daniel held up a hand. If you call them now, Hale will know something's wrong. He's careful, sophisticated. The moment federal investigators start asking questions, he'll sanitize everything. We need evidence that proves what he's doing before he knows we're looking. What kind of evidence? The next dose. If we can catch him administering the toxin, document it in real time, get a clean sample before he can destroy it. That's proof nobody can dismiss. Olivia's eyes narrowed. He's scheduled to examine Ava tonight at 8. Private consultation like always. She paused. You want to catch him in the act. It's the only way to make this stick. Otherwise, it's my word against his. And I'm just a janitor. No, Olivia said slowly. You're a toxicology researcher who lost everything trying to expose corporate corruption. You're someone with a grudge against the pharmaceutical industry. That's how Hale's lawyers will paint you. They'll make you look like a conspiracy theorist with an axe to grind. Daniel hadn't thought that far ahead, but she was right. Of course she was right. So what do we do? Olivia was quiet for a moment, thinking. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. This was the CEO who'd built an empire speaking now, not the terrified mother. We document everything. You said the toxin appears in the IV supplements during his private examinations. Can you test those supplements before and after his visit tonight? If I can get samples without being seen, yes. I'll make sure you can. My assistant will create a distraction around 8:15, right after Hale enters the room. That gives you a window to collect your sample. She looked at him hard. But I want independent verification. Someone who can confirm your findings. Someone whose credentials can't be questioned. That's a problem, Daniel admitted. I don't have connections anymore. Anyone I knew in the field won't take my calls. And we can't risk bringing someone else into this before we have solid proof. Olivia tapped her phone screen, pulling up contacts. I have a friend who runs a private forensic lab. Owes me several favors. If I ask him to run a blind analysis on a sample with no questions asked, he'll do it. We get your sample tonight. I have it analyzed by someone with credibility, and if it confirms your findings, we go to the FBI with evidence they can't ignore. It wasn't a perfect plan. There were a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it was better than anything Daniel had come up with alone. Okay, we do it tonight. One more thing, Olivia said. If this is real, if Hale is really poisoning Ava, then stopping tonight's dose isn't enough. We need to detoxify whatever's already in her system. Can that compound be reversed? Daniel had been dreading this question. Partially. The neurological damage can be halted if we stop the exposure. Some of it will heal naturally once the toxin clears her system, but there's probably permanent damage already. I won't know how much until she's stable. Olivia's face went very still. Permanent damage. I'm sorry. If we'd caught this earlier. Don't. She cut him off again. Tell me what you need to help her recover. Chelation therapy. It binds to heavy metals and helps flush them out. Supportive care for the neurological symptoms. Time. Daniel hesitated. And different doctors. Everyone currently treating Ava has missed this for 6 weeks. Either they're incompetent or they're complicit. Either way, she needs new people. Consider it done. Olivia looked at her watch. It's 11 a.m. now. Hale arrives at 8 p.m. That gives us 9 hours to prepare. She stood up and opened the door. Go home. Get whatever equipment you need. Be back here at 7:30. Park in visitor parking, not employee lot. Come to the 5th floor. There's a private waiting area I'll make sure is empty. We'll coordinate from there. Daniel nodded and started to leave. Then he stopped. Mrs. Bennett? Thank you for listening. Most people wouldn't have. Most people didn't watch their daughter dying while spending millions on doctors who accomplished nothing. Olivia's voice was tight. If you're right, you're saving her life. If you're wrong, I'll make sure you regret ever speaking to me. Now go. We have work to do. Daniel left the hospital and drove home in a daze. The morning had taken on a surreal quality. 6 hours ago, he'd been preparing to approach a billionaire with a theory that sounded insane. Now he was coordinating with that same billionaire to catch a murderer. His hands shook on the steering wheel as the reality of what he'd set in motion hit him. If this went wrong, he'd lose everything. His job. His freedom. Possibly Sophie. If this went right, a child would live. Back at his apartment, Daniel paced the small living room trying to think through every angle. He needed to collect an IV sample before Hale's visit and another sample after. The before sample would be clean. The after sample would contain the toxin. That comparison would prove tampering beyond any doubt. But getting into Ava's room to collect samples without raising suspicion was tricky. He wasn't scheduled to work tonight. Showing up would look strange. And if anyone saw him handling medical equipment, they'd call security immediately. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Olivia Bennett. My assistant will page Dr. Hale at 8:17 p.m. with an urgent call about another patient. He'll have to leave Ava's room briefly. That's your window. Make it count. Daniel texted back a confirmation and tried not to think about all the ways this could implode. He pulled out his old equipment from the storage unit again and set up a proper mobile testing kit. Sterile collection vials. Gloves. Reagents. Everything he'd need to run a quick preliminary analysis before sending samples to Olivia's contact for official confirmation. At 3 p.m., he picked Sophie up from school. She chattered about her day while Daniel tried to focus on driving instead of the knot of anxiety in his stomach. At home, he made her an early dinner and tried to act normal. "Daddy, you're being weird," Sophie said around a mouthful of spaghetti. "I'm just tired, sweetheart." "You're always tired lately, more than usual." She looked at him with those too perceptive eyes. Is something wrong? Daniel wanted to tell her everything was fine, that nothing was wrong, that their small, safe life would continue unchanged. But he'd promised himself after the divorce that he wouldn't lie to Sophie about important things. "I'm dealing with something complicated at work," he said carefully. "It's nothing for you to worry about, but I might need to go back to the hospital tonight for a few hours. Mrs. Martinez next door will stay with you." Sophie frowned. "You never go back to work at night." "I know, but this is important. More important than staying home with me?" The question hit harder than she probably intended. "No, honey. Nothing's more important than you, but sometimes we have to do difficult things even when we'd rather not. Do you understand?" Sophie thought about it, twirling spaghetti on her fork. "Like when I had to tell Mrs. Peterson that Emma was cheating on the test? I didn't want to be a tattletale, but it was the right thing." Exactly like that. Sometimes doing the right thing is scary and uncomfortable, but we do it anyway. "Okay." She went back to eating. "But you have to promise you'll be home for breakfast. You make better pancakes than Mrs. Martinez. I promise." At 6 p.m., Daniel called his neighbor and explained the situation in vague terms. Mrs. Martinez, a retired teacher who'd basically adopted them as surrogate family, agreed immediately. At 7 p.m., Daniel kissed Sophie goodbye and drove back toward Whitmore Medical Center. The sun was setting as he pulled into visitor parking. The hospital loomed against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with fluorescent light. Daniel sat in his car for a moment, steeling himself. This was it, the moment where everything either started making sense or fell completely apart. He grabbed his bag with the testing equipment and headed inside. The lobby was quieter at this hour, just a few visitors signing in at the desk. Daniel bypassed the main entrance and took the side elevators to the 5th floor. Olivia had texted him the code for the private waiting area, a small room normally reserved for families dealing with critical patients. She was already there when he arrived, still wearing the same clothes from this morning, looking like she hadn't eaten or slept in the intervening hours. Another woman stood beside her, late 20s, sharply dressed, carrying a tablet. Olivia's assistant, Daniel assumed. "This is Rachel," Olivia said without preamble. "She'll coordinate the distraction. Show her what you need." Daniel pulled out a small diagram he'd sketched. The IV supplements are changed every 8 hours. The next change is scheduled for 9 p.m., but Hale typically adds something during his 8 p.m. examination. I need to collect a sample from the current IV bag before his visit and from the new bag after. The comparison will show whether he's tampering. Rachel studied the diagram. "How long do you need in the room?" 2 minutes, maybe 3. Hale's examination usually lasts 20 minutes. I'll page him at 8:17. He'll have to step out to take the call. That gives you your window, but you'll need to be in position before he arrives. "Where?" Daniel asked. "I can't just stand in the hallway waiting. The nurses will question why I'm there." Olivia and Rachel exchanged a look. "Supply closet," Rachel said. "There's one 30 feet from Ava's room. I'll unlock it before Hale arrives. You hide there until you see him enter her room. Collect your first sample, then wait in the closet again until the page pulls him out. Collect your second sample. Then you're done." It was a simple plan. Too simple. Daniel could already see the flaws. What if a nurse enters the room while I'm collecting samples? What if Hale doesn't leave when you page him? What if... Then we improvise. Olivia cut him off. "This isn't a lab experiment, Mr. Hayes. We don't get controlled conditions. We work with what we have." She was right, but that didn't make it less terrifying. Daniel checked his watch. 7:40. 20 minutes until Hale arrived. "Mrs. Bennett," he said carefully, "if this goes wrong, if I get caught, I need you to promise something. My daughter Sophie is 8 years old. She stays with our neighbor when I work nights. If I end up arrested or worse, she needs someone to make sure she's okay. Can you promise me that?" Olivia's expression softened slightly. "You have my word. If this goes sideways, your daughter will be taken care of. But let's focus on not letting it go sideways." Rachel left to set up the distraction. Olivia and Daniel waited in the small room, not talking much. What was there to say? They were two people who'd lost control of their lives in different ways, now gambling everything on one desperate plan. At 7:55, Rachel texted, "Closet unlocked. Hale in the building. Get in position now." Daniel stood up. His legs felt unsteady. "Here we go." "Mr. Hayes," Olivia's voice stopped him at the door. "Thank you for this. Whatever happens, thank you for seeing what nobody else saw." Daniel nodded and left before his nerve failed completely. The 5th floor corridors were familiar from months of night shifts, but they looked different now. More exposed, more dangerous. He moved quickly to the supply closet Rachel had indicated and slipped inside. The closet smelled like disinfectant and stored medical supplies. Daniel left the door cracked just enough to see the hallway. His heart hammered against his ribs as he waited. 1 minute passed, 2. Then he saw Dr. Victor Hale walking down the corridor with his characteristic confident stride. Hale was exactly what you'd expect from a distinguished physician. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit under his white coat. He carried a leather medical bag and walked like someone who'd never doubted himself in his life. He nodded to a passing nurse, smiled, made some small talk. The perfect picture of a caring doctor. Then he entered room 14 and closed the door behind him. Daniel counted to 30, giving Hale time to get settled. Then he slipped out of the closet and moved quickly to Ava's room. His hands were shaking as he swiped his janitor keycard. The lock clicked open. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The room was dim, just the glow from the monitors. And there was Dr. Hale, standing beside Ava's bed with his back to the door, so focused on whatever he was doing that he didn't hear Daniel enter. Daniel froze. This wasn't the plan. He was supposed to collect the sample before Hale arrived, not walk in while the man was actively in the room. But it was too late to retreat now. Moving would draw attention. Standing still might give him a few precious seconds to see what Hale was actually doing. Dr. Hale pulled something from his medical bag. A syringe. He held it up to the light, checking the dose with professional precision. Then he moved toward the IV line with movements that were calm, practiced, deliberate. Daniel watched, his breath caught in his throat, as Dr. Victor Hale injected the contents of that syringe directly into Ava Bennett's IV port, the poison flowing invisibly into the sleeping child's bloodstream. Murder dressed up as medical care. And then Hale turned around and saw Daniel standing there. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Hale's face went through several expressions: surprise, confusion, calculation. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing through options that all ended badly. "Can I help you?" Hale's voice was calm, professional, but his eyes were very sharp. Daniel forced his voice to work. "Sorry, doctor. Wrong room. I thought this was—" He gestured vaguely toward the door. "You're the night janitor." Hale's tone hadn't changed, but something cold had entered it. "Daniel, isn't it? Why are you here during the day?" "Forgot something earlier. Came back to get it." The lie sounded weak, even to Daniel's ears. Hale took a step closer. "Really? What did you forget?" Daniel's mind went blank. He couldn't think of a single convincing answer. Couldn't think past the fact that he'd just watched a man poison a child, and now that man knew Daniel had seen it. "My cleaning supplies," Daniel finally said. "Left a bottle under the sink." "I see." Hale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, I'm conducting a private examination right now. Perhaps you could come back later." "Of course. Sorry for the interruption." Daniel turned toward the door, every instinct screaming at him to run. But running would confirm Hale's suspicions. He forced himself to walk normally, hand reaching for the door handle. "Mr. Hayes?" Daniel stopped, slowly turned back around. Dr. Hale was still smiling that cold smile. "Be careful walking around the hospital when you're off duty. People might get the wrong idea about what you're doing here." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat delivered in a pleasant voice. "I'll keep that in mind," Daniel said. Then he left the room before his shaking legs gave out. He made it back to the supply closet and leaned against the wall, his heart threatening to explode out of his chest. That had been catastrophically bad. Hale knew something was wrong, knew someone had walked in at exactly the wrong moment, and Daniel had basically painted a target on his back. His phone buzzed. "Olivia, where are you? Did you get the sample?" Daniel stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to explain what had just happened. Before he could respond, another text arrived. Hale just left the building. Canceled his examination after 5 minutes. Something spooked him. Daniel closed his eyes. Of course Hale had left. He'd realized he'd been interrupted during the poisoning, realized someone might have seen something. And now he'd go into defensive mode, covering his tracks, eliminating evidence. The plan had failed before it even started, and Daniel had just made himself the primary threat to a man willing to murder a child for money. Daniel typed out a response to Olivia with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "He saw me. I walked in while he was administering the dose. He knows someone interrupted him." 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Olivia's message came through. 5th floor. Now. Daniel left the supply closet and made his way back to the private waiting area on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. Olivia was pacing when he entered, her phone pressed to her ear. She held up one finger, signaling him to wait. "I don't care what it costs," she was saying into the phone. "I want private security on my daughter's room starting immediately. Nobody goes in or out without my explicit approval. Not doctors, not nurses, nobody." She listened for a moment. "Yes, I understand hospital policy. Change the policy. I'm moving Ava to a different facility within the hour." She ended the call and turned to Daniel. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp with controlled fury. "Tell me exactly what happened." Daniel recounted the entire encounter, leaving nothing out. How he'd entered the room expecting it to be empty. How he'd watched Hale inject something into the IV line. How Hale had turned and seen him standing there. The awkward exchange. The thinly veiled threat. Olivia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He's going to come after you." "I know. Not just professionally. If Hale realizes you saw him poisoning Ava, you're a direct threat to everything. His freedom, his reputation, his financial arrangements.
People like that don't leave loose ends."
Daniel had already reached the same conclusion, but hearing it stated so bluntly made his stomach turn. "What do I do?" "You disappear, tonight. Take your daughter and go somewhere Hale can't find you. I'll arrange protection, but it'll take time to set up properly. Until then, you need to be invisible."
I can't just disappear. I have a job, rent to pay. Sophie has school. You have a target on your back, Olivia cut him off. Everything else is secondary.
"How much do you need to disappear for a week? 2 weeks? I'll cover it." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. He'd spent 3 years rebuilding his life on his own terms, accepting nothing from anyone who might use it as leverage later. But pride was a luxury he couldn't afford with Sophie's safety at stake. $5,000, he said. "That covers lost wages, rent, and enough to stay somewhere off the grid. Ypres." Gigita. Olivia pulled out her phone and made a few taps. "Done. Check your account. And here's my personal cell number. You call me directly if anything seems wrong. Anything at all." Daniel's phone buzzed with a notification. $5,000 had just appeared in his checking account. He stared at the number, feeling the weight of what he'd gotten himself into pressing down on his chest.
"What about Ava?" he asked. "If you move her to another facility, Hale will know something's wrong. He'll cover his tracks even faster."
"Let him try." Olivia's voice was cold. "I'm done playing games. Ava gets moved to St. Catherine's Hospital tonight with a completely new medical team. I've already contacted the director there. She's a friend, and she owes me. Ava will have 24-hour security and constant monitoring. If Hale tries to get near her, we'll have him on camera. That's not enough for an arrest. We still need proof he's been poisoning her. Without that, he walks. Then we get proof another way." Olivia pulled up something on her phone and showed it to Daniel. It was a text message from someone named Marcus. "My forensic contact. I sent him the photos of your test results an hour ago. He's agreed to testify that the compound you found is consistent with deliberate poisoning if this goes to trial." Daniel felt a flicker of hope. That's something. But we still need to connect Hale directly to the toxin. Otherwise, it's just proof that Ava was poisoned, not proof that Hale did it. I'm working on that angle. Bennett Biotech has resources most people don't. I've got my head of security pulling Hale's financial records, travel history, purchasing patterns. If he acquired that compound somewhere, we'll find the trail. It was more than Daniel had managed to accomplish alone, but it still felt insufficient. Financial investigations take time. Hale has hours, maybe days before he realizes we're building a case. He'll sanitize everything. So we move faster than he can cover. Olivia's jaw was set in a hard line. I didn't build a billion-dollar company by sitting around waiting for other people to solve my problems. Hale made a mistake when he went after my daughter. Now I'm going to bury him. Daniel believed her. There was something ruthless in Olivia Bennett's eyes that suggested she'd burn down half the city to protect Ava. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made him nervous. People with unlimited resources and single-minded determination tended to create collateral damage. "Just make sure I'm not part of that collateral," Daniel said quietly. Olivia looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You saved my daughter's life by speaking up when you had every reason to stay silent. I don't forget debts like that. You'll be protected." "Will I?" Daniel couldn't keep the bitterness out of his voice. "I've heard that before. 7 years ago, the executives at Meridian Pharmaceuticals promised to protect me when I reported the safety violations. Instead, they destroyed my career and made sure I'd never work in science again. Powerful people make promises, Mrs. Bennett, but when it comes down to protecting themselves versus protecting someone expendable, I know which choice they make." "I'm not them," Olivia said. "Everyone says that." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Listen to me carefully. I spent 15 years building Bennett Biotech from a startup in my garage to a company worth $2 billion. I made that happen by being smarter, tougher, and more stubborn than everyone who bet against me. When I give my word, I keep it. Always." So when I tell you that you and your daughter will be protected, you can take that to the bank. Daniel wanted to believe her, but trust was expensive, and he'd already paid more than he could afford once before. I'll take Sophie and disappear tonight, he said. Call me when you have something concrete on Hale. Until then, we stay away from this situation. That's probably smart. Olivia checked her watch. Ava's transfer is scheduled for midnight. I'll be with her the entire time. Rachel will coordinate security on both ends. If Hale makes a move, her phone rang, interrupting her. She glanced at the screen and her expression shifted to something harder. It's the hospital administrator, probably calling to complain about me moving Ava without proper procedure. She answered the call. This is Olivia Bennett. Daniel watched her face change as she listened to whoever was on the other end. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hand tightened on the phone until her knuckles went white. When did this happen? She asked, her voice barely controlled. A pause. I'm on my way. She ended the call and looked at Daniel with eyes full of rage and fear. Ava's condition just deteriorated, severely. She's being moved to intensive care right now. Daniel felt his stomach drop. How severely? Respiratory distress, seizures. They think she's having a massive reaction to something, but they don't know what. Olivia was already moving toward the door. This wasn't gradual, this was sudden. Like someone gave her a concentrated dose all at once. Hale, Daniel said. He knew he'd been interrupted, knew someone might have seen something, so he gave Ava a lethal dose before he left. Finishing the job before anyone could stop him, Olivia stopped in the doorway and turned back. Her face was a mask of controlled terror. Can you help her? I don't know if the dose was large enough. If it's already in her system, Daniel grabbed his bag with the testing equipment. I need to see her, test what's in her bloodstream, figure out how much toxin we're dealing with. You're not authorized to... I don't care about authorization. Your daughter is dying right now. Either I try to help or we stand here arguing about hospital protocols while she stops breathing. For once, Olivia didn't argue. They ran. The intensive care unit was chaos when they arrived. Nurses moved urgently around Ava's bed while a doctor Daniel didn't recognize barked orders. Ava was barely visible behind the medical equipment that had been rolled in. Tubes, monitors, the beeping of machines tracking a life that was slipping away. Olivia pushed through to her daughter's bedside. What's happening? Someone tell me what's happening. The doctor, young, stressed, clearly overwhelmed, turned to her. Mrs. Bennett, we need you to step back. Your daughter is experiencing acute respiratory failure and seizure activity. We're doing everything we can, but her vitals are extremely unstable. What caused this? We don't know. Her blood work shows severe metabolic dysfunction, but nothing that explains this level of deterioration. It's like her entire nervous system is shutting down simultaneously. Because it was. The toxin was doing exactly what it was designed to do, just faster than before. Daniel pushed forward, ignoring the nurse who tried to stop him. I need a blood sample, he said to the doctor. Right now. The doctor looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Who are you? Someone who can help. Give me a blood sample or that child dies. Your choice. Security? The doctor gestured toward the door, but Olivia cut him off. Give him the sample, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. That's not a request. The doctor looked between them, clearly torn between protocol and the raw authority in Olivia's voice. Finally, he nodded to a nurse. Draw 5 cubic centimeters. The nurse moved quickly, extracting a small vial of blood from Ava's IV line. She handed it to Daniel with obvious reluctance. Daniel immediately pulled out his portable testing kit and got to work right there in the middle of the intensive care unit. The test he was running was crude compared to proper lab analysis, but it would tell him what he needed to know. He added reagents to the blood sample, watching the color changes that indicated presence of heavy metals. 30 seconds? A minute. The solution shifted from clear to a deep amber color that made Daniel's heart sink. The concentration is at least 5 times what I detected before, he said to Olivia. Hale gave her a massive dose, enough to kill her within hours instead of days. Can you reverse it? Olivia's voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the desperation underneath. Chelation therapy. It binds to the heavy metals and helps flush them out. But I'd need to convince these doctors to administer an emergency treatment based on my word alone, and I'm just a janitor, Olivia finished. She turned to the doctor. My daughter is being poisoned with an organometallic neurotoxin. She needs immediate chelation therapy with DMSA or EDTA. Start the treatment now. The doctor stared at her. Mrs. Bennett, I can't just administer experimental treatments based on what? Science? This man is a trained toxicologist who identified the compound killing my daughter while your entire team missed it for 6 weeks. Olivia's voice rose, sharp and commanding. Olivia's G. You can start the treatment now and possibly save her life, or you can waste time questioning it and watch her die. Those are your options. Several nurses had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. The doctor looked cornered, desperate. If I give an unauthorized treatment and something goes wrong, I could lose my license. And if you don't and she dies, you'll lose a lot more than that, Olivia said coldly. I have lawyers who will make your life a living nightmare if my daughter doesn't survive because you were too worried about protocol to save her. It was a threat delivered with absolute certainty. The doctor looked at Ava, at the monitor showing vitals that were continuing to decline, and made his decision. Get me DMSA 500 milligrams IV, he said to a nurse. Then to Daniel, if this makes her worse, you're both responsible. If we do nothing, she dies anyway, Daniel said. At least this gives her a chance. The nurse returned with the medication within minutes. The doctor administered it through Ava's IV line with hands that weren't quite steady. Then everyone waited. There was nothing else to do. The chelation therapy would either work or it wouldn't. Daniel watched the monitors, tracking Ava's vitals with the part of his brain that still remembered how to read medical data. Her heart rate was erratic, blood pressure dangerously low, oxygen saturation dropping. The toxin was winning. Come on, Olivia whispered beside him. She was holding Ava's small hand, tears streaming down her face. Come on, baby, fight. Please fight. 2 minutes passed. 3. Ava's breathing remained labored, the ventilator doing most of the work. Then gradually, something changed. The heart rate monitor steadied slightly. Blood oxygen ticked up 1 percentage point, then another. It's working, the doctor said, surprise evident in his voice. Her vitals are stabilizing. Daniel felt a wave of relief so intense it made him dizzy. It wasn't over. Ava was still critical, still in danger, but the immediate crisis was being controlled. The chelation therapy was binding to the toxin, pulling it out of her system before it could finish destroying her nervous system. Olivia was sobbing now, her forehead pressed against her daughter's hand. Thank you, she kept saying. Thank you, thank you. Daniel stepped back, giving her space. His hands were shaking again from adrenaline and exhaustion. He just performed emergency toxicology in the middle of an ICU, based on field tests and 7-year-old training. It could have gone catastrophically wrong. It almost had. The doctor approached him quietly. What you did was reckless and completely outside any acceptable medical protocol. I know. It also saved her life. I'll need a full report on that compound, everything you know about it, and I'll need your credentials verified before I can officially document your involvement. Daniel laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. My credentials were destroyed 7 years ago by people who didn't like what I discovered. Officially, I'm nobody, just a janitor who got lucky with a guess. That wasn't luck, the doctor said. That was expertise. I don't know your story, but whatever happened to your career, you clearly still know what you're doing. It was the first time in 3 years anyone in the medical field had acknowledged Daniel as anything other than the guy who emptied their trash. The words hit harder than he expected. Thank you, Daniel said quietly. The doctor nodded and returned to monitoring Ava's recovery. Daniel pulled out his phone to check the time and saw 3 missed calls from Mrs. Martinez. His heart jumped. Sophie. He stepped into the hallway and called back immediately. Mrs. Martinez answered on the first ring. Daniel, thank goodness. There's a man here asking about you. Ice flooded Daniel's veins. What kind of man? Older, well-dressed, says he's a doctor from the hospital, says there was an emergency with one of the patients, and he needs to speak with you urgently. Mrs. Martinez's voice dropped to a whisper. But something feels wrong about him. He's too pushy. Keeps asking if Sophie is here, if I know where you went. I didn't tell him anything. But Daniel, I'm worried. Dr. Hale. It had to be. He'd tracked Daniel to his apartment, looking to eliminate the threat before Daniel could expose him. And now he was at Daniel's door, asking about Sophie. Listen to me carefully. Daniel said, forcing his voice to stay calm. Lock all the doors and windows. Don't let that man inside for any reason. I'm sending someone to get you and Sophie right now. Stay inside until they arrive. Daniel, what's going on? I'll explain later. Just please keep Sophie safe. Don't trust anyone except the person I send. They'll have identification from Bennett Biotech Security. Nobody else. He ended the call and ran back into the ICU. Olivia was still at Ava's bedside, but she looked up when Daniel burst in. Hale's at my apartment, Daniel said urgently. He's looking for me and asking about my daughter. I need security there now. Olivia was already pulling out her phone. Rachel, emergency situation. I need a security team at Daniel Hayes' apartment immediately. She looked at Daniel. What's the address? Daniel gave it to her. Olivia relayed it to Rachel, then added, There's a little girl there with the neighbor. Get them both somewhere safe. And if Dr. Victor Hale is present, detain him until police arrive. She listened for a moment, then said, I don't care if it's technically kidnapping. Do it anyway. We'll sort out the legal issues later. She ended the call and looked at Daniel. They'll be there in 10 minutes. Your daughter will be safe. 10 minutes is a long time when there's a murderer at your door. Then let's make sure Hale has bigger problems than your daughter. Olivia stood up and addressed the doctor. I need you to call the police. Tell them there's reason to believe Dr. Victor Hale deliberately poisoned my daughter. Tell them we have evidence and a witness. The doctor looked shocked. Mrs. Bennett, those are serious accusations. They're facts. Make the call. While the doctor reluctantly pulled out his phone, Olivia turned back to Daniel. Hale's getting desperate. That's good. Desperate people make mistakes. He went to your apartment instead of running, which means he still thinks he can fix this. Thinks he can eliminate you and make the problem go away. Or he's going to use Sophie as leverage, Daniel said, his voice tight. Force me to stay quiet by threatening her. Then we move first. The security team will get Sophie and your neighbor to a safe location. The police will start investigating Hale's connection to the poisoning. And you and I are going to give them everything we have so they can't ignore it. It was a good plan in theory, but Daniel had learned the hard way that plans involving police and powerful people rarely went the way they were supposed to. Hale had connections, money, reputation. Daniel had suspicions and field tests that might not hold up under official scrutiny. His phone rang. Unknown number. Daniel answered it warily. Hello? Mr. Hayes? The voice was smooth, cultured, instantly recognizable. Dr. Victor Hale. I think we need to have a conversation, a private one. Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. I have nothing to say to you. I think you do. I'm standing outside your apartment right now. Charming building, by the way. Your neighbor is very protective of your daughter. Admirable loyalty. But I'm sure you'd prefer I didn't have to get more insistent about speaking with you. It was a threat wrapped in polite language. Daniel felt rage and fear warring in his chest. If you touch my daughter... I'm not a monster, Mr. Hayes. I'm a physician. I help people. All I want is a conversation to clear up some misunderstandings from earlier today. Meet me in the hospital parking lot in 20 minutes. Come alone. And perhaps we can resolve this situation in a way that doesn't involve law enforcement or frightened little girls. The line went dead. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing. Hale wanted to meet. Wanted to make some kind of deal, or more likely, wanted to eliminate Daniel somewhere away from witnesses. But if Daniel didn't go, Hale might escalate the threat against Sophie. The security team was on the way, but 10 minutes suddenly felt like an eternity. What did he say? Olivia was watching him carefully. He wants to meet. Parking lot. 20 minutes. Daniel looked at her. He's threatening Sophie without saying it directly, making it clear he knows where she is and can get to her. Then we use it, Olivia said immediately. You go to the meeting wearing a wire. Get him talking. Get him to admit what he's done. The police will have everything they need. A wire? You think I just have surveillance equipment lying around? No, but I do. Olivia was already texting Rachel. My security team carries recording devices. They can set you up in 5 minutes. Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to say this was insane, that confronting a murderer in a parking lot was the worst idea possible. But Sophie was in danger. and sometimes the worst idea was the only option left. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it." The next 15 minutes were a blur of preparation. Rachel's security team arrived with equipment that looked military grade. They fitted Daniel with a small microphone that clipped to his shirt collar and a recording device that went in his jacket pocket. The lead security officer, a woman named Torres, showed him how to activate it. "Keep him talking," Torres said. "The longer he talks, the more likely he'll say something incriminating. Don't accuse him directly. That puts him on the defensive. Act like you're considering his offer, whatever it is. Make him think he's winning. And if he tries to kill me, we'll have 2 plainclothes officers positioned nearby. If things get physical, they'll intervene immediately." Torres met his eyes. "But Hayes, this guy is smart. If he suspects a trap, he'll walk. You need to sell this." Daniel nodded, his mouth dry. He'd never been good at deception. His whole career had been built on pursuing truth regardless of consequences. Now he had to pretend to be someone willing to compromise for safety. The parking lot where Hale had specified was on the east side of the hospital, away from the main entrance. Fewer cameras, fewer witnesses. Daniel arrived at exactly 8:30 and stood under one of the overhead lights, trying not to look as terrified as he felt. A car pulled up 3 minutes later. Expensive sedan, dark blue. Doctor. Hale stepped out, still wearing his white coat over the expensive suit. He smiled as he approached, the same warm smile he probably used with worried parents. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming. I was worried you might do something rash." "What do you want?" Daniel kept his voice level. "To understand what you think you saw earlier today, because I'm concerned there's been a significant misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I saw you inject something into Ava Bennett's IV line. Something that made her condition deteriorate within hours." Hale's smile didn't waver. "I administered medication, yes. That's my job. But if you're implying something sinister, I'm afraid you're mistaken. I've been treating Ava for 6 weeks. Her condition is tragic, but entirely natural." "Natural." Daniel felt his control slipping. A synthetic neurotoxin that just happens to accumulate in her system is natural? "You're making accusations based on what? Your expertise as a janitor?" Hale's tone remained pleasant, but something sharp had entered his eyes. "I looked into your background after our encounter. Mr. Hayes." Daniel Hayes, former research scientist at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, fired for making false accusations against his employer, lost his career, his marriage, his credibility, now working night shifts, cleaning hospitals, and apparently inventing conspiracy theories about respected physicians. I wasn't fired. I was destroyed for telling the truth. That's one interpretation. Another is that you're a disgraced scientist with a grudge against the medical establishment, looking for another chance to play hero. Hale stepped closer. "Nobody will believe you, Mr. Hayes. You have no credibility, no standing, no proof that would hold up under real scrutiny. You're a ghost in a janitor's uniform." "I have proof. Test results showing exactly what you've been giving her." "Do you?" Hale's smile widened. "Proof obtained how? Through illegal collection of medical waste? Unauthorized testing? Evidence gathered by someone with no legal authority to conduct investigations? Even if your results are accurate, and I'm skeptical they are, nothing you found is admissible. No court would accept it. No prosecutor would pursue it." Daniel's heart sank because Hale was right. Every piece of evidence he'd gathered was legally questionable at best. The recording device in his pocket felt like his only weapon, but Hale hadn't actually admitted anything yet. He was too smart for that. "Then why are you here?" Daniel asked. "If I'm so irrelevant, why track me down? Why threaten my daughter?" "I haven't threatened anyone. I simply wanted to understand what delusions you're operating under so I could address them appropriately." Hale's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "But since we're being direct, let me be very clear. You are a nobody, Mr. Hayes, a failed scientist with a troubled past and a young daughter to support. If you continue making baseless accusations against me, I will destroy whatever's left of your life. I'll make sure you never work again. I'll make sure Child Services questions your fitness as a parent. I'll make sure you regret ever walking into that hospital room." There it was. The threat delivered with cold precision. Daniel felt the recording device in his pocket and pushed harder. "Because I saw you poisoning her. Because I know what you're doing and why." "And why would I possibly harm a patient?" Hale's voice dripped with condescension. What motivation could I possibly have? Money. Bennett Biotech crashes if Ava dies. You profit when that happens. Hale laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. You really have constructed quite the fantasy. I treat sick children, Mr. Hayes. That's all I do. If you continue spreading these delusions, you'll find yourself facing legal action for defamation. And unlike you, I can afford very good lawyers. Daniel felt the conversation slipping away. Hale wasn't going to confess, wasn't going to say anything that could be used against him. He was too controlled, too aware of how these things worked. I'll prove it, Daniel said desperately. I'll find evidence you can't dismiss. You'll do nothing, Hale interrupted, because you're smart enough to know when you're beaten. Go home to your daughter, Mr. Hayes. Forget whatever you think you saw. Move on with your life. That's the only way this ends well for you. Hale turned and walked back toward his car. Daniel stood there, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on him. The recording had captured threats, but no confession. Nothing that definitively proved Hale had poisoned Ava. Just the words of a respected doctor warning a delusional janitor to stop making trouble. Hale paused before getting in his car. One more thing, Mr. Hayes. Your daughter is very sweet. Sophie, isn't it? 8 years old, same age as Ava. It would be terrible if anything happened to her because her father couldn't let things go. Then he drove away, leaving Daniel standing alone in the parking lot with a recording that might not be enough and a threat that was crystal clear. Torres emerged from the shadows nearby. We got all of that. The threat against your daughter, especially. I'm sentimental.
Is it enough? Daniel asked. Torres hesitated. It's something, but it's not a confession. It's harassment and implied threats.
Which might get him questioned but won't lead to arrest for attempted murder. Daniel wanted to scream, wanted to break something. Instead, he just stood there, feeling like he'd failed everyone who mattered. Sophie was still in danger. Ava was still fighting for her life. And Hale was driving away, confident and untouchable. His phone rang. Rachel, we have Sophie and your neighbor. They're safe. We're taking them to a secure location now. Where? Daniel demanded. Undisclosed for security reasons, but I'll text you the address once we're sure nobody's following. Your daughter is scared but unharmed. Small mercy. At least Sophie was away from Hale's reach. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to think through the exhaustion and fear clouding his mind. There had to be a way to prove what Hale had done. Had to be evidence somewhere that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. What now? Torres asked. Daniel opened his eyes and looked back toward the hospital where Ava Bennett was fighting to survive the poison that had been slowly killing her for 6 weeks. Where Olivia Bennett was probably still sitting at her daughter's bedside, holding her hand and praying for a miracle. Now we find evidence that sticks, Daniel said. Whatever it takes. The secure location turned out to be a small house in a gated community 20 miles outside the city. Daniel arrived at 2 in the morning, exhausted and wired on adrenaline that wouldn't let him rest. 2 security guards stood at the entrance, checking his identification 3 times before letting him through. Sophie was asleep on a couch inside, curled up under a blanket with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Mrs. Martinez sat in a nearby chair looking shaken but relieved when Daniel walked in. What's happening, Daniel? She asked quietly. Those security people wouldn't tell me anything except that we needed to leave immediately. And that man at your door, the doctor, he was so strange, so insistent. Daniel sat down heavily in the chair across from her. I can't explain everything right now, but that doctor isn't who he pretends to be, and I got involved in something dangerous trying to help someone. I'm sorry you got pulled into this. Mrs. Martinez studied his face for a long moment. You look like you did 3 years ago, when everything fell apart with your wife and your job. That same desperate look, because it's happening again, Daniel said bitterly. I tried to do the right thing, and it's destroying my life all over again. Is Sophie in danger? Not anymore. Not here. But she was, and that's my fault. Mrs. Martinez reached over and put her hand on his arm. Daniel, I've known you and Sophie for 3 years. I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion trying to give that little girl a good life. I don't know what you're caught up in, but I know you. You're not the kind of man who creates problems. You're the kind who steps in when everyone else looks away. The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. He'd spent so long thinking of himself as a failure, as someone whose principles had destroyed everything, that hearing someone speak well of his character felt unreal. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Now get some sleep. You look like death." Daniel wanted to argue that there was too much to do, too many angles to figure out, but exhaustion was pulling at him like gravity. He lay down on the floor beside Sophie's couch, not trusting himself to sleep anywhere he couldn't see her. Within minutes, he was unconscious. He woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and Sophie's small hand shaking his shoulder.
Daddy, where are we?
Daniel sat up, his back protesting from a night on hardwood floor. "Somewhere safe, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Confused? Mrs. Martinez said we had to leave really fast last night because of an emergency." "What kind of emergency?" Daniel looked at his daughter's worried face and made a decision. Sophie was 8 years old, but she was smart and perceptive. Lying to her wouldn't help. "Do you remember how I told you I was dealing with something complicated at work?" he asked. Sophie nodded. "Well, it got more complicated. I found out that someone was hurting a little girl at the hospital where I work. I tried to help stop it, but the person doing the hurting got angry and came looking for me. So we had to go somewhere they couldn't find us for a little while." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Someone's trying to hurt you?" "They're trying to scare me into staying quiet, but some other people are helping keep us safe while we figure out how to make this right."
"The little girl at the hospital," Sophie said slowly. "Is she okay?" "She's getting better because we figured out what was wrong and helped the doctors fix it." So you saved her?"
Daniel thought about Ava fighting for her life in the ICU, about how close they'd come to losing her, about how much still needed to be done. "I'm trying to, but it's not finished yet." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, "You should finish it, even if it's scary, because that's what you told me about doing the right thing, remember? You said sometimes we have to do difficult things even when we'd rather not." Out of the mouths of children. Daniel hugged his daughter tightly. "You're absolutely right. That's exactly what I said." After breakfast, Daniel's phone rang with a call from Olivia Bennett. He stepped outside to take it. "How's Ava?" he asked immediately. "Stable. Still critical, but improving. The chelation therapy is working. The doctors say if her vitals continue strengthening at this rate, she'll be out of immediate danger by tonight." Olivia's voice was thick with exhaustion and relief. "Daniel, you saved my daughter's life. I don't know how to—" "Don't!" Daniel interrupted. "We're not done yet. Ava's recovering, but Hale is still free, still a threat. What did the police say about the recording?" "They're treating it as harassment and intimidation, which gives them grounds to question Hale. But they can't arrest him for attempted murder based on what we have. The assistant district attorney I spoke with says we need either a confession or physical evidence directly linking him to the poisoning. The financial connection isn't enough, and your test results are inadmissible because of how they were obtained." Daniel had expected this, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. "So Hale walks?" "Not if I can help it. I've hired a private investigation firm to dig into every aspect of his life. Bank records, phone logs, travel history. If he acquired that toxin somewhere, if he communicated with anyone about this plan, if he left any trail at all, they'll find it. That takes time. Meanwhile, Hale knows we're coming after him. He'll cover everything." "Then we don't give him time." Olivia's voice hardened. "I'm calling a press conference for this afternoon. I'm going to tell the media that my daughter was deliberately poisoned and that Dr. Victor Hale is under investigation. Public pressure might force his hand, make him do something desperate that exposes him." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "That's dangerous. You'll be painting a target on your back. Hale has already shown he's willing to kill. If you publicly accuse him, he might what? Come after me too." "Good. I have security and resources. I can protect myself. And if he does something rash trying to stop me, that's more evidence against him. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using every weapon I have.
Hale thought he could kill my daughter and get away with it because I was too distracted to notice. He was wrong. Now he's going to find out what happens when you come after an 8-year-old girl whose mother built an empire. Daniel couldn't argue with her logic, but the plan made him deeply uneasy. He didn't argue with her. What do you need from me? I need you at the press conference. Standing beside me is the person who discovered the poisoning. You're the hero in this story, Daniel. The janitor who saw what all the expensive doctors missed. I'm not a hero. I'm someone who got lucky and stubborn. That's what heroes are, Olivia said. People who get lucky and stubborn at the right moment. Be at Bennett Biotech headquarters at 2 p.m. And Daniel, bring your daughter if you want. Let the world see what Hale threatened. Let them see the stakes. She ended the call before Daniel could respond. He stood outside the safe house, looking at the manicured lawns and expensive cars in the gated community, feeling completely out of his depth. A press conference. Public accusations against a respected physician. This was about to explode into something massive, and Daniel was being asked to stand at the center of it. 3 years ago, he'd tried to expose corporate corruption and been destroyed for it. Now he was being asked to do it again, only this time with cameras and reporters and the entire world watching. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to take Sophie somewhere far away and let Olivia fight this battle alone. But Ava Bennett was alive because Daniel hadn't run. And if he ran now, Hale would walk free to hurt someone else's child. Daniel went back inside and found Sophie watching cartoons with Mrs. Martinez. Hey, sweetheart, how do you feel about going to a press conference this afternoon? Sophie looked confused. What's a press conference? It's where people talk to reporters about important things. The lady whose daughter I helped wants me to be there, wants people to know what happened. Will the person who tried to hurt you be there? No, but talking about it might make him angry. Sophie thought about this seriously. Then she said, if you don't talk about it, does he get in trouble? Probably not. Then you should talk, even if it makes him angry, because he should get in trouble for hurting that little girl. 8 years old and already understanding justice better than most adults. Daniel felt pride and fear in equal measure. Okay, we'll go together. The drive to Bennett Biotech headquarters took 40 minutes through midday traffic. The building was impressive, all glass and steel rising 30 stories above the business district. Security was tight, with guards checking credentials at every entrance. Olivia had arranged for Daniel and Sophie to be escorted directly to the executive floor. Rachel met them at the elevator. Mrs. Bennett is in her office preparing her statement. The press conference starts in 30 minutes. We'll have you positioned beside her at the podium. How many reporters? Daniel asked. At last count, 43. Local and national. This story is big. CEO's daughter poisoned by her own doctor. It's the kind of thing that dominates news cycles. Daniel's stomach churned. 43 reporters meant millions of people watching. Meant his face and name broadcast everywhere. Meant no anonymity, no hiding, no going back to the quiet life he'd been living. Olivia's office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She stood at those windows now, her reflection showing a woman who hadn't slept but refused to show weakness. When she turned and saw Daniel and Sophie, her expression softened slightly. You must be Sophie, Olivia said, walking over and crouching down to the child's level. Your father is very brave. Did you know that? Sophie nodded shyly. He saved a little girl. He did. He saved my little girl, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. Olivia stood and looked at Daniel. Are you ready for this? No, Daniel said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. Good answer. Olivia checked her watch. 20 minutes. Let me show you what I'm planning to say. She pulled up a document on her computer screen. Daniel read through the statement, feeling his anxiety ratchet higher with every sentence. Olivia was holding nothing back. She named Doctor, hailed directly, outlined the poisoning, cited Daniel's investigation, and called for immediate criminal charges. It was bold, aggressive, and would absolutely destroy Hale's reputation, even if he was never convicted. This is going to start a war, Daniel said. Good. I'm very good at war. At exactly 2 p.m., they walked into a large conference room that had been set up for the press conference. Rows of chairs filled with reporters, cameras on tripods, microphones clustered at the podium. The noise level was intense, everyone talking at once.
Olivia stepped up to the podium and the room fell silent. Daniel stood slightly behind her left shoulder, exactly where Rachel had positioned him. Sophie sat in the front row with Mrs. Martinez, looking nervous but fascinated.
"Thank you all for coming," Olivia began, her voice strong and clear. 6 weeks ago, my daughter Ava became seriously ill with symptoms no doctor could diagnose.
Despite treatment by some of the country's best specialists, her condition continued to deteriorate. I spent millions seeking answers while watching my child slowly die. The reporters were already scribbling notes, cameras rolling. Olivia continued. 3 days ago, I learned the truth. Ava wasn't sick. She was being poisoned, deliberately, systematically, by her primary physician, Dr. Victor Hale. She paused, letting that statement land. The room erupted with questions, but Olivia held up her hand. "I'll take questions after I've finished. Doctor." Hale administered a sophisticated synthetic neurotoxin designed to mimic a rare metabolic disorder. He did this over a period of 6 weeks, slowly poisoning my daughter while pretending to treat her. A reporter shouted out, "How do you know this?" Olivia gestured to Daniel. "Because this man discovered it. Daniel Hayes works as a janitor at Whitmore Medical Center, but 7 years ago, he was a toxicology researcher.
While cleaning my daughter's hospital room, he detected a chemical trace the doctors had missed. He identified the poison, tracked the pattern of administration,
And ultimately saved Ava's life." Every camera in the room swung toward Daniel. He forced himself to stand still, to not look away, even though every instinct wanted to hide from the attention. "Mr. Hayes risked his career and his safety to expose this crime," Olivia continued. "Dr. Hale attempted to intimidate him into silence, threatened his young daughter, but Mr. Hayes refused to stay quiet. Because of his courage and expertise, my daughter is alive and recovering." More questions erupted. Olivia held up her hand again. "I'm calling on the district attorney's office to immediately file criminal charges against Dr. Victor Hale for attempted murder, medical fraud, and conspiracy. I'm calling on the state medical board to revoke his license, and I'm calling on anyone who has been treated by Dr. Hale to review their medical records carefully. Because if he did this to my daughter, we must ask who else he's hurt." That last statement was brilliant and devastating. Even if Hale was never convicted, the suspicion would destroy him. Every patient he'd ever treated would question their care. Every hospital would distance themselves. His career was over, regardless of what happened in court. "Now I'll take questions," Olivia said.
The next 30 minutes were chaos. Reporters shouting over each other. Questions flying at Olivia, at Daniel, about Hale, about the investigation, about everything.
Olivia handled it with practiced skill, giving just enough information to fuel the story without compromising any legal case. When reporters tried to interview Daniel directly, Olivia deflected, protecting him from having to speak. Finally, it was over. Olivia thanked everyone and left the podium. Daniel followed her back to her office, his hands shaking from adrenaline. "That was either brilliant or insane," Daniel said once they were alone.
"Both. Usually is." Olivia pulled out her phone, which was already blowing up with notifications. "It's working. The story is everywhere. Twitter, news sites, television. Within an hour, everyone in the country will know Dr. Victor Hale's name. He's going to retaliate. Let him try. I have security on Ava, on you, on myself. And now the whole world is watching. Anything Hale does now will only make him look guilty." Daniel wanted to believe it was that simple, but he'd seen how powerful people operated when cornered. They didn't always act rationally. Sometimes they lashed out in ways that hurt everyone around them. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered warily. "Hello? You made a mistake." It was Hale's voice, tight with barely controlled rage. "A very serious mistake. Is that a threat, doctor?" "Because there are 43 reporters who just heard your name connected to attempted murder. Threatening me now would be stupid." "I don't make threats, Mr. Hayes. I make observations. And I observe that you've destroyed my reputation based on speculation and inadmissible evidence. That has consequences." "Like poisoning an 8-year-old girl? Those kinds of consequences?" "I saved hundreds of children over my career, helped families through unimaginable crises,
And now my life's work is destroyed because a failed scientist and a hysterical mother needed someone to blame for their own failures. Daniel felt anger burning away his fear. We have evidence. We have testimony. We have motive. And we have your threats recorded. You're finished, Hale. One osa. Am I? Hale laughed, but it was an ugly sound. You have circumstantial connections and test results that won't hold up in court. You have accusations made during a press conference, which isn't the same as proof. My lawyers are already preparing defamation suits against both you and Mrs. Bennett. By the time this is over, you'll wish you'd stayed silent. Then why are you calling? If you're so confident, why bother? Miss. Silence on the line for a moment. Then Hale said, Because I want you to understand something, Mr. Hayes. You think you're the hero in this story, the janitor who saved the day. But you're just a man who destroyed another man's life based on suspicion and paranoia. When this falls apart, when the evidence doesn't hold up, and the charges are dropped, everyone will remember that you started this, and they'll remember your daughter too. The line went dead. Daniel stood there, phone in hand, feeling ice in his veins. That last comment about Sophie wasn't subtle. It was a direct threat wrapped in plausible deniability. What did he say? Olivia had been watching his face. He's planning something. I don't know what, but he's not running scared. He's angry and cornered and still thinks he can win. Then we make sure he can't. Olivia picked up her office phone. Rachel, get me the head of security and the private investigators. Conference room in 5 minutes. We're not waiting for the police to build a case. We're building it ourselves. Iki? Borman. Over the next several hours, Daniel watched Olivia Bennett operate at full capacity. She assembled a team of investigators, lawyers, and forensic experts. They spread out across a large conference table with laptops and documents, working through every angle of Hale's life. Financial records showed connections to a venture capital firm called Meridian Holdings. Phone records showed multiple calls between Hale and executives at that firm in the weeks before Ava got sick. Travel records showed Hale had made 3 trips to a pharmaceutical research facility in New Jersey, where the specific toxin used on Ava had been developed. It was circumstantial, but it was building into something substantial. The investigators tracked down shipping records showing chemical supplies ordered under Hale's name from a medical supply company. Cross-referenced those chemicals with the components needed to synthesize the neurotoxin. Found credit card receipts from restaurants near the research facility in New Jersey. He wasn't as careful as he thought, one of the investigators said. He covered the obvious connections but left traces in the details. Is it enough for an arrest? Olivia asked. Maybe. Depends on the prosecutor and how aggressive they want to be. The investigator pulled up another document. But there's something else. Hale's financial situation is worse than we initially thought. He's heavily in debt. Personal loans, mortgage on a house he can't afford, alimony payments to 2 ex-wives. He was desperate for money. That strengthens motive. Daniel leaned forward, studying the financial records. How much does he stand to make if Bennett Biotech crashes? Meridian Holdings is positioned to make approximately $300 million on their short positions. Hale's cut, based on his investment partnerships, would be around $15 million. $15 million. The price Dr. Victor Hale had put on Ava Bennett's life. Daniel felt sick. He'd known the financial motive existed, but seeing the actual numbers made it real in a way that turned his stomach. This wasn't some abstract conspiracy. This was a calculated business decision where murder was just another transaction. We need to tie him directly to the toxin, Olivia said. Everything else is circumstantial. We need proof he acquired it, possessed it, administered it. Us, you said right. One of the forensic experts spoke up. The chelation therapy pulled the toxin out of Ava's bloodstream. Those samples are being stored as medical waste right now. If we can get those samples and match them to any chemical trace found in Hale's possession, that's direct proof. Can we access those samples legally, boss? Daniel asked. With the right warrants, yes. And given the press conference and public attention, judges will be more willing to issue those warrants quickly. Supos ishikita. Olivia was already on the phone with someone, her voice sharp and commanding. Daniel watched her work, marveling at the transformation from terrified mother to ruthless CEO. This was someone who'd built an empire through sheer determination, and now she was bringing all that force to bear on destroying the man who'd hurt her daughter. By 8 p.m., the investigation had produced a 20-page report documenting Hale's financial troubles, his connections to Meridian Holdings, his trips to the research facility, and the chemical purchases. It wasn't a confession, but it was a compelling narrative that would be hard to dismiss. Olivia sent the entire report to the district attorney's office with a cover letter written by her legal team. Then she called a contact at the FBI and sent them a copy too. "Now we wait," she said, settling back in her chair. "Either they move on this tonight, or Hale has time to cover more tracks." Daniel looked out the windows at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Dr. Victor Hale was probably in his own office or home, strategizing with his own lawyers, trying to figure out how to survive this. The press conference had wounded him, but wounded animals were often the most dangerous. His phone buzzed with the text from Mrs. Martinez. Sophie was asleep. Safe. Everything was quiet at the secure house. "You should go be with your daughter," Olivia said. "There's nothing more to do tonight. What about you? Where are you staying?" "Here, in my office. I'm not leaving this building until Hale is arrested." "Have you even seen Ava since the press conference?" Olivia's face tightened. "The hospital security says she's stable and improving. That's enough for now. My job is to make sure the person who did this to her pays for it." Daniel understood the sentiment, but he also knew that Ava would want her mother beside her when she woke up, not waging war from an office building. "Mrs. Bennett, don't," she cut him off. "Don't tell me I should be at the hospital. Don't tell me I'm handling this wrong. I'm doing what I need to do to protect my daughter. That's all that matters." Daniel nodded and didn't push further. Everyone dealt with trauma differently. Olivia's way was to fight. His way had been to disappear. Neither was perfect, but both were human. He left Bennett Biotech headquarters and drove back to the safe house through evening traffic. The news was already covering the press conference. He heard his own name on the radio, heard reporters discussing the case, heard experts weighing in on whether the evidence would hold up in court. His life had just been turned inside out again. Every news outlet in the country now knew his name, his past, his current job. By tomorrow, there would be deep dives into his history, into the Meridian pharmaceutical scandal, into everything he'd tried to leave behind. But Ava was alive. That had to count for something. At the safe house, Daniel checked on Sophie, who was sleeping peacefully. Mrs. Martinez was watching the news coverage with a concerned expression. "They're talking about you," she said, "calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who noticed something wrong. That's what heroes do, Daniel. They notice when everyone else looks away." Daniel wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with him. He thanked Mrs. Martinez and collapsed onto the couch. Within minutes, he was asleep. He woke at midnight to his phone ringing. Olivia's name on the screen. "They arrested him," she said without preamble. FBI just raided Hale's home. Found chemical residue matching the toxin in his private office. Found communications with Meridian Holdings discussing the financial arrangements. Found everything. Daniel sat up, suddenly wide awake. "They arrested him?" 30 minutes ago. Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. He's being held without bail pending arraignment. Olivia's voice cracked slightly. "It's over, Daniel. It's actually over." Daniel felt a wave of relief so intense it made him dizzy. After everything, after all the fear and threats and uncertainty, Hale was actually in custody, actually facing consequences. "What happens now?" he asked. Now the prosecutors build their case, but with the physical evidence from his office and all the financial documentation, they're confident about conviction. Hale's lawyers are already trying to cut deals, but the DA's office isn't interested. They want the full charges. And Ava? Awake, talking, asking for pancakes. Olivia laughed, but it was mixed with tears. "The doctors say she'll make a full recovery. Some residual effects from the poisoning, but nothing permanent. She's going to be okay, Daniel. Because of you, she's going to be okay." Daniel closed his eyes, letting those words sink in. A child was going to live. After 6 weeks of suffering, after nearly dying, Ava Bennett was going to recover and grow up and have a life. That was what mattered, not the press conferences or the threats or his own destroyed anonymity. A little girl was going to be okay. "Thank you for believing me," Daniel said quietly. "Thank you for not staying silent." Olivia paused. "Daniel, I want to offer you something. A position at Bennett Biotech, head of pharmaceutical safety and ethics. Full salary, benefits, your own lab. A chance to do the work you were meant to do."
Daniel's breath caught. A job. Not just any job, but a return to the scientific career he'd thought was dead forever.
The opportunity to work in toxicology again, to use his skills for something meaningful. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. You have expertise this industry needs, and you have integrity, which is even rarer. Take some time, consider it, let me know. After the call ended, Daniel sat in the dark safe house, processing everything that had happened. 72 hours ago, he'd been a janitor cleaning hospital floors and trying to stay invisible. Now he was a public figure who'd exposed a murder plot and been offered a job that could change his life. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why are you awake?" Just got some good news, sweetheart. The bad man who was trying to hurt people got arrested. He can't hurt anyone anymore.
Sophie climbed onto the couch beside him. "Does that mean we can go home?" "Soon. Maybe tomorrow." "Good. I miss my room." She yawned. "Daddy,
Are you going to keep being a janitor?" Daniel thought about Olivia's offer, about the chance to reclaim the career he'd lost, about the risk of entering that world again and potentially facing another betrayal, about what it would mean for Sophie to have a father who was a scientist instead of someone who cleaned floors.
"I don't know yet," he said honestly. "Would it matter to you?"
Sophie thought about it seriously. "I just want you to be happy. You haven't looked happy in a long time, not until you helped that little girl. Out of the mouths of children, indeed."
Daniel hugged his daughter close and looked out at the night, wondering what came next. The immediate crisis was over,
but life still stretched out ahead, with all its uncertainty and possibility. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel Hayes let himself imagine a future that looked like more than just survival. The trial began 4 months later on a cold morning in February. Daniel sat in the gallery beside Olivia Bennett, watching Dr. Victor Hale enter the courtroom in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the fact that he was facing the rest of his life in prison. Hale's lawyers had tried everything to get the charges reduced, to negotiate a plea deal, to suppress evidence. None of it had worked. The district attorney's office was going for maximum sentences on all counts. Sophie wasn't there. Daniel had made sure of that. An 8-year-old didn't need to see the inside of a criminal courtroom, didn't need to understand how close her father had come to being silenced permanently. But Ava was there, sitting between Olivia and her aunt, looking small but determined. She'd insisted on attending despite her mother's concerns. "I want to see him," Ava had said when Daniel visited the Bennett home the week before. "I want to see the man who tried to kill me." She'd recovered remarkably well. The neurological damage had been minimal thanks to the early intervention with chelation therapy. She still had some weakness in her left hand and occasional headaches, but the doctor said both would likely resolve with time and physical therapy. Physically, she was healing. Emotionally was more complicated. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. They laid out the entire conspiracy, from Hale's financial desperation to his connections with Meridian Holdings, to the systematic poisoning of an 8-year-old girl. They showed the jury financial records, chemical analysis, communications between Hale and the venture capital firm. They presented testimony from forensic experts who'd analyzed the toxin found in Hale's office and matched it to the compound extracted from Ava's bloodstream. Then they called Daniel to the witness stand. He'd been dreading this moment for weeks. Testifying meant reliving everything publicly, meant facing Hale's defense attorneys who would try to shred his credibility. But as Daniel walked to the stand and placed his hand on the Bible for the oath, he felt surprisingly calm. The truth was the truth. Nothing Hale's lawyers said could change what had actually happened. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Reeves, started with Daniel's background, his education in toxicology, his work at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the scandal that had destroyed his career. "Mr. Hayes, can you tell the jury what happened when you reported safety violations at Meridian Pharmaceuticals 7 years ago?" Reeves asked. Daniel kept his voice steady. "I discovered that a drug the company was preparing to release had serious adverse effects that weren't being disclosed to the FDA. I reported it through internal channels first, then to regulatory authorities when the company tried to bury it. In response, Meridian launched a campaign to discredit me. They called my research flawed, questioned my competence, and made sure I'd never work in pharmaceutical research again." "Were your findings accurate?" "Were your findings?" "Yes.
2 years later, after I'd already lost my career, the FDA independently discovered the same problems and blocked the drug. But by then, my reputation was destroyed. Why did you become a janitor at Whitmore Medical Center? Because it was the only job I could get. I had a daughter to support and bills to pay. I took whatever work I could find. Reeves nodded. And on the night of October 15th, what did you notice while cleaning room 14? Daniel walked the jury through everything. The chemical trace he'd detected, the pattern of Ava's declining health, the decision to investigate despite having no authority to do so, the discovery of the toxin, the confrontation with Hale, the desperate attempt to prove what was happening before it was too late. When Reeves finished, Hale's defense attorney stood up. His name was Marshall Chen, and he had a reputation for destroying witnesses on cross-examination. Mr. Hayes, you were fired from Meridian Pharmaceuticals, correct? Chen's voice was pleasant but pointed. I was forced out, yes, and you blamed the pharmaceutical industry for ruining your life. I blamed specific people for covering up dangerous research. That's not the same thing. But you carried resentment toward pharmaceutical companies and the doctors who work with them. Daniel saw where this was going. I carried anger toward corruption, not toward legitimate medicine. Yet when you saw Dr. Hale, a respected physician, treating a patient, your immediate assumption was that he was doing something wrong. Isn't that bias? My immediate observation was a chemical compound that didn't belong in a hospital room. The investigation came after that. Chen shifted tactics. You collected medical waste illegally, didn't you? I collected evidence of a crime, without authorization, without a warrant, without any legal standing to conduct an investigation. I was a janitor who noticed something wrong. I didn't have the luxury of legal standing. I had a dying child and knowledge that could save her. Knowledge, Chen said, his voice dripping with skepticism. Based on tests you conducted in your apartment kitchen, using equipment that hadn't been calibrated in 7 years. Tests that no legitimate laboratory would consider reliable. The tests were confirmed by independent forensic analysis, Daniel said calmly. The toxin I identified is the same toxin found in your client's office. Chen moved closer to the witness stand. Mr. Hayes, isn't it true that you saw an opportunity for redemption? A chance to be the hero you couldn't be 7 years ago? So you constructed this elaborate conspiracy theory around a respected doctor who was simply doing his job? Daniel met Chen's eyes steadily. I didn't construct anything. I identified a poison. I tracked a pattern. I saved a child's life. The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence obtained illegally. Evidence that saved Ava Bennett's life, Daniel interrupted. You can question my methods all you want. You can attack my credibility. But you can't change the fact that your client had a sophisticated neurotoxin in his possession, had financial motivation to harm Mrs. Bennett's daughter, and was administering poison disguised as medical treatment. Those are facts, not theories. The cross-examination continued for another hour, but Chen couldn't shake Daniel's testimony. Every attack on his credibility bounced off the simple reality that Daniel had been right. Ava had been poisoned. Hale had done it. The evidence was overwhelming. When Daniel finally left the stand, he felt drained but steady. He'd told the truth. Whatever happened next was out of his hands. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented witness after witness, building an airtight case. Hospital staff who'd noticed Hale's unusual behavior. Financial experts who explained the money trail. Forensic scientists who analyzed the toxin. FBI agents who'd searched Hale's office and found the evidence. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt. They argued that the toxin could have been planted, that the financial connections were coincidental, that Hale was being framed by a vindictive mother and a disgraced scientist. But every argument fell apart under scrutiny. The strongest moment came when Olivia Bennett took the stand. She described watching her daughter deteriorate, spending millions on specialists who found nothing, trusting doctor. Hale completely because he was supposed to be the best. Her voice broke when she talked about the night Ava nearly died, about watching her daughter seizing and struggling to breathe while doctors scrambled to save her. Dr. Hale sat in my home, Olivia said, looking directly at the jury. He drank coffee at my table. He looked me in the eye and told me he was doing everything possible to save Ava. And the entire time, he was the one killing her. For money. Because $15 million was worth more to him than my daughter's life.
The jury's faces showed exactly what they thought of that calculation. Hale never took the stand. His lawyers kept him off the witness stand, probably knowing that the prosecution would destroy him on cross-examination. So the jury never heard his version directly. They only saw the evidence, and the evidence was damning. Closing arguments happened on a Friday afternoon. The prosecution hammered home the premeditation, the cruelty, the betrayal of medical ethics. The defense made one last attempt to create doubt, arguing that the case was built on circumstantial evidence and the questionable testimony of a disgraced scientist. But even Chen's eloquence couldn't overcome the mountain of proof stacked against his client. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on every count. Guilty of attempted murder, guilty of medical fraud, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of everything. Hale's face went gray as the verdicts were read. His lawyers immediately started talking about appeals, but everyone in the courtroom knew it was over. The evidence was too strong, the case too solid. Dr. Victor Hale would spend decades in federal prison. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, an older woman who'd spent 30 years on the bench, looked at Hale with open disgust. "You violated every principle of medical ethics," she said. "You betrayed the trust of a family in their most vulnerable moment. You poisoned a child for financial gain. The law allows me to sentence you to 25 years to life. I'm imposing the maximum, 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole." Hale was led away in handcuffs. Olivia held Ava close, tears streaming down both their faces. Daniel sat in the gallery feeling something between relief and exhaustion. It was finally over. Truly over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Olivia gave a brief statement thanking the prosecution team and praising Daniel's courage. Daniel tried to avoid the cameras, but one reporter pushed through and shoved a microphone in his face. "Mr. Hayes, people are calling you a hero. What do you say to that?" Daniel looked at the camera, thinking about what Sophie had said months ago about heroes being people who notice when everyone else looks away. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who saw something wrong and couldn't walk away from it. Anyone in my position should have done the same thing." "What's next for you?" That was the question Daniel had been wrestling with for months. Olivia's job offer still stood. She'd been remarkably patient, never pushing, just reminding him that the position was his whenever he was ready. But accepting meant stepping back into a world that had destroyed him once before, meant trusting that this time would be different. "I don't know yet," Daniel said honestly, "but I'm figuring it out." That night, Daniel sat in his small apartment with Sophie, finally back in their own home after months of upheaval. The safe house had been necessary but temporary. This place, cramped and worn as it was, felt real in a way nothing else had. Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen table while Daniel cooked dinner. Spaghetti again, because it was cheap and she liked it. Some things hadn't changed despite everything else. "Daddy, there's an article about you in the school library," Sophie said without looking up from her math problems. "Mrs. Peterson showed it to our class. It says you're a hero who saved a little girl's life." Daniel stirred the pasta, considering his response. "What do you think about that?" "I think it's true. You did save her. I saw her on TV. She looks happy now." "She is. Her mom says she's back in school, doing gymnastics, being a regular kid. That's good." Sophie finished a problem and looked up. "Are you going to take that job Mrs. Bennett offered?" "I don't know. What do you think I should do?" Sophie thought about it seriously, her face scrunched in concentration. "I think you should do what makes you happy. You were sad for a long time when you were just cleaning. You seemed different after you helped Ava, like you remembered something important." Daniel's throat tightened. His 8-year-old daughter understood him better than he understood himself sometimes. "What did I remember?" "That you're good at helping people, and that it matters." Out of the mouths of children. Daniel dished out the spaghetti and sat down across from her. "If I take the job, things will change. I'll be working different hours, making more money, which is good, but also more stress, more pressure, and maybe more risk if I ever have to speak up about something wrong again." "But you'll always speak up about wrong things," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "That's who you are. You can't help it." She was right. Daniel had tried for 3 years to be invisible, to keep his head down and avoid trouble. But when Ava was dying, he'd spoken up anyway because staying silent was impossible. That was just who he was. Pretending otherwise hadn't changed it. "Okay," Daniel said. "I'll take the job." Sophie grinned. "Good. Does this mean we can get a bigger apartment?" "Eventually. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." But as Daniel watched his daughter eat her spaghetti and chatter about school, he let himself imagine what came next. A real career, financial stability, the chance to use his expertise to prevent the kind of corruption that had destroyed him the first time. It wouldn't be easy. There would be politics and power struggles and people who resented him for being the janitor who'd exposed a doctor. But it would be meaningful work. Work that mattered. The next morning, Daniel called Olivia and accepted the position. She sounded genuinely pleased. "Welcome to Bennett Biotech," she said. "When can you start?" 2 weeks? I need to give proper notice at the hospital." "Of course. Daniel, I want you to know something. This job isn't charity or repayment. I'm hiring you because you're exactly what this industry needs. Someone with expertise and integrity. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Promise me you'll be the same pain in the ass to me if you ever see something wrong in my company." Daniel laughed. "I promise. Though I hope it doesn't come to that." "So do I. But if it does, I want you to do exactly what you did with Hale. Speak up, no matter the cost." It was a remarkable thing for a CEO to say, and Daniel chose to believe she meant it. His last 2 weeks at Whitmore Medical Center were strange. Everyone knew who he was now, the janitor who'd exposed Dr. Hale. Fellow staff members who'd never spoken to him before suddenly wanted to hear the story. Some treated him like a hero. Others seemed uncomfortable, like his presence reminded them of their own failure to notice what was happening. On his final night shift, Daniel cleaned room 14 one last time. It had been reassigned to a different patient, a teenager recovering from surgery. The room looked the same, but felt different. The weight of what had happened there had lifted. Ava Bennett had survived. That's what mattered. Angela, the nurse who'd been working the night Daniel first noticed something wrong, found him in the corridor afterward. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said. "And thank you. I was taking care of Ava for weeks and never saw what was happening. That bothers me." "You had no reason to suspect," Daniel said. "Hale was careful, sophisticated. He fooled everyone. Except you. I got lucky. Wrong person in the wrong place at the right time." Angela shook her head. "It wasn't luck. It was paying attention. Most people don't anymore. They go through the motions, see what they expect to see, never question the authority figures. You questioned. That made all the difference." After his shift ended, Daniel turned in his badge and uniform. The hospital administrator, looking uncomfortable, thanked him for his service and wished him well in his new position. There was no acknowledgement of what Daniel had actually done. No recognition that he'd saved a patient's life while their doctors missed it. Just a form handshake and paperwork. That was fine. Daniel wasn't doing this for recognition, never had been. His first day at Bennett Biotech was overwhelming. Olivia gave him a tour of the facility personally, introducing him to department heads and research teams. His office was on the 10th floor with windows overlooking the city. It had a real desk, a computer, and equipment he hadn't seen since his Meridian days. The title on his door read, Director of Pharmaceutical Safety and Ethics. His first task was reviewing all of Bennett Biotech's research protocols to identify potential safety issues. It was exactly the kind of work he'd done 7 years ago, only this time with a company that actually wanted him to find problems. Olivia had made it clear that his job was to be skeptical, to question, to push back when something didn't seem right. "I don't want yes men," she'd said during his first week. "I want someone who'll tell me the truth even when it's inconvenient. That's you." Daniel threw himself into the work. He reviewed clinical trial data, examined safety protocols, questioned research methodologies. He found issues, some minor and some significant, and wrote detailed reports. To Olivia's credit, she addressed every concern he raised. When he found a drug trial that needed additional safety monitoring, she implemented it immediately. When he questioned the independence of a consulting firm, she brought in new oversight. It wasn't perfect. There were still politics, still people who resented the former janitor questioning their work. But Daniel had learned something important over the past year. Perfect didn't exist. You worked with what you had, spoke up when it mattered, and tried to do more good than harm. 3 months into his new position, Daniel took Sophie to meet Ava Bennett for the first time. Olivia had invited them to her home for dinner. wanting to properly thank Daniel away from the media attention that still occasionally flared up around the case. The Bennett house was enormous, the kind of wealth Sophie had only seen on television. But Ava greeted them at the door like it was the most normal thing in the world, immediately dragging Sophie off to show her the playroom.
Olivia and Daniel stood in the foyer watching the girls disappear upstairs, their laughter echoing through the house. "They're the same age," Olivia said quietly.
When I think about what almost happened, about how close we came to losing her, she stopped, composing herself. I owe you everything, Daniel. There's no way to repay that. You already did.
The job, the chance to do meaningful work again. That's more than enough. It's not nearly enough, but I'll keep trying anyway.
Dinner was surprisingly normal. The girls chattered about school and books and music. Olivia asked Sophie about her interests, genuinely engaged in the answers. Daniel felt some of the tension he'd been carrying for months finally ease. This wasn't a formal thank you or obligation. This was two families who'd been through something terrible together, finding their way to something like friendship on the other side. After dinner, while the girls played, Olivia showed Daniel her home office. It was smaller than her corporate office, but more personal, with photos of Ava at various ages covering one wall. I've been thinking about what you said during the trial, Olivia said, about how corruption thrives when good people stay silent. I want to do something about that, something bigger than just running my company well. What do you have in mind? A foundation, dedicated to exposing medical fraud and supporting people who speak up about dangerous practices. Funding for whistleblowers who lose their jobs. Legal support for people taking on powerful institutions. Education programs about recognizing and reporting medical misconduct. She looked at Daniel. I want you to help me build it. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. This was what had been missing 7 years ago. Support for people who tried to do the right thing. Protection for whistleblowers instead of punishment. A system that encouraged honesty instead of destroying the honest. I'm in, he said. Whatever you need. The foundation launched 6 months later. They called it the Ava Bennett Foundation for Medical Ethics, ensuring that what had happened to her would drive change in the industry. The first grant went to a nurse who'd lost her job after reporting safety violations at a rural hospital. The second went to a researcher who'd been blacklisted for questioning pharmaceutical trial data. Daniel found himself speaking at medical conferences, talking about the importance of questioning authority and trusting your instincts. The same institutions that had once destroyed him now invited him to speak to their students. It was surreal and uncomfortable and necessary. At one conference, a young resident approached him afterward. I noticed something wrong in my hospital, she said quietly, but I'm scared to report it. My supervisor is well respected. I'm just a resident. What if I'm wrong? What if they destroy my career? Daniel remembered standing in that exact position, feeling that exact fear. What did you notice? He asked. She described a pattern of surgical errors being blamed on equipment failure when the real problem was an attending physician with declining skills who refused to retire. Patients were being harmed, but nobody wanted to confront the doctor because of his reputation and connections. You're not wrong, Daniel said, and staying silent means more patients get hurt. Report it. Document everything. And if your hospital won't listen, contact the Ava Bennett Foundation. We'll help you. The resident nodded, looking both terrified and determined. Daniel gave her his card and watched her walk away, hoping she'd have the courage to speak up, hoping that this time the system would protect her instead of punishing her. A year after the trial, Daniel received notice that Dr. Victor Hale had filed an appeal. His lawyers argued that the evidence had been obtained improperly, that Daniel's testimony should have been excluded because of his history with pharmaceutical companies, that the verdict was based on prejudice rather than facts. It was a desperate attempt that had no real chance of success, but it meant Daniel might have to testify again. He wasn't worried about it. The truth was the truth. Hale could appeal all he wanted, but he couldn't change what he'd done or erase the evidence. The appeal was eventually denied, and Hale remained in federal prison where he belonged. By the time Sophie turned 9, their lives had stabilized into something Daniel barely recognized from 2 years earlier. They'd moved into a larger apartment in a better neighborhood. Sophie had her own room finally, decorated with posters and books and all the things a kid her age should have. Daniel was making enough money to save for her college fund, to take her on actual vacations, to stop choosing between groceries and rent. But more than the financial stability, Daniel had found purpose again. Every day at Bennett Biotech, He worked to prevent the kind of corruption that had destroyed him. Every talk he gave at conferences, every whistleblower the foundation supported, every safety protocol he strengthened, it all mattered. He was making a difference in a way he never could have as a janitor, though he never forgot that it was the janitor who'd saved Ava Bennett. The prestigious position and impressive title came later. The thing that mattered had happened when he was nobody, with no authority and every reason to stay silent. That's what he tried to teach young scientists and medical students when he spoke. You don't need a fancy title to do the right thing. You just need to pay attention and have the courage to speak up. On a cold afternoon in March, 2 years after the trial, Daniel stood in his office looking out at the city. His phone rang with a call from the prosecutor, Janet Reeves. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "Hale's venture capital partners just got indicted. The FBI followed the money trail and found fraud charges beyond just the Ava Bennett case. Turns out they'd been manipulating stock prices for years through various schemes. Hale's case broke everything open. How much time are they looking at? Decades? Multiple counts of securities fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. The whole criminal enterprise is coming down." After the call ended, Daniel thought about how one decision to speak up had created ripples far beyond what he'd imagined. He'd just been trying to save one child. Instead, he'd exposed a conspiracy that had harmed countless people through market manipulation and fraud. Sometimes doing the right thing in one small corner of the world changed more than you could ever predict. Sophie was in the 4th grade now, dealing with friend drama and book reports and all the normal things kids dealt with. She rarely mentioned the events of 2 years ago. That chapter of their lives had closed, replaced by the routine of school and homework and weekend soccer games. But sometimes she'd mention Ava, usually after seeing her on TV or in the news. Ava had become something of a young activist, speaking at medical conferences with her mother about patient safety and the importance of questioning authority. At 10 years old, she was articulate and passionate, turning her near-death experience into motivation to change the system that had almost killed her. The two girls stayed in touch, meeting for playdates occasionally. They weren't best friends, their lives were too different for that, but they had a connection born from shared trauma. They were both alive when they easily could have been casualties of corruption and greed. One evening, Daniel picked Sophie up from a playdate at the Bennett house. Olivia walked him to his car while the girls said goodbye. "Ava asked me something yesterday," Olivia said. "She wanted to know if she should be angry at Dr. Hale, if it was okay to hate him for what he did." "What did you tell her?" "That anger was natural, that what he did was unforgivable, but that holding on to hate would hurt her more than it hurt him. That the best revenge was living a full life and making sure what happened to her helped other people." Olivia paused. Was that the right answer? Daniel thought about his own anger toward the people who'd destroyed his career at Meridian. The years he'd spent bitter and resentful, unable to move forward because he was trapped in the past. "Yes, he said. "That was the right answer. The past matters, but it can't be all that matters. Otherwise, people like Hale win even after they lose." "I used to think success was about building something big," Olivia said. "A company, a fortune, a legacy. But watching Ava almost die and then recover, I realized success is simpler than that. It's about protecting the people who matter, about doing right by them even when it's hard." Daniel understood completely. Success for him used to mean publications and research grants and professional recognition. Now it meant Sophie sleeping safely in her room and Ava Bennett being alive to ask complicated questions about anger and forgiveness. Everything else was just details. 3 years after the trial, Daniel was promoted to Chief Ethics Officer at Bennett Biotech, overseeing all safety and compliance operations. The foundation had supported 43 whistleblowers, resulting in 12 major investigations and significant changes to industry regulations. Daniel had published 3 papers on pharmaceutical safety protocols that were now required reading in medical schools. None of it would have happened if he'd stayed silent that night in room 14. If he'd just emptied the trash and moved on, telling himself it wasn't his problem, that he was nobody and nobody would listen. That's what most people did when they noticed something wrong. They rationalized it away, convinced themselves they were mistaken, decided it wasn't their responsibility. Daniel had made a different choice. Not because he was particularly brave or heroic, but because he'd looked at a dying child and couldn't live with himself if he walked away. That choice had cost him his anonymity, put his daughter at risk, and forced him to relive the trauma of his destroyed career. but it had also saved a life and exposed a conspiracy and rebuilt everything he'd thought was lost forever. On the 5th anniversary of Ava's recovery, the foundation held a gala fundraiser. Daniel attended with Sophie, now 13 and more interested in the dessert table than the speeches. Ava, at 13, had grown into a confident young woman who spoke to the assembled donors about patient advocacy with the poise of someone twice her age. During her speech, Ava mentioned Daniel directly. The person who saved my life wasn't a famous doctor or a powerful executive. He was someone everyone ignored, someone nobody took seriously. But he paid attention when nobody else did. He cared when nobody else bothered. He proved that you don't need authority or prestige to make a difference. You just need to notice when something's wrong and refuse to look away. The applause was thunderous. Daniel felt his face flush with embarrassment and pride. Sophie elbowed him. "That's you, Dad. She's talking about you." "I know." "Are you going to cry?" "Maybe a little." Sophie rolled her eyes but squeezed his hand. At 13, she was too cool to admit she was proud of her father, but Daniel knew anyway. He could see it in the way she told her friends about his work, the way she asked questions about the foundation, the way she'd started talking about studying medicine herself someday. After the gala, Daniel stood outside with Olivia while their daughters took selfies together, trying to capture the perfect photo to post on their social media accounts. "I've been thinking about something," Olivia said, "about what happens when we're gone. When I'm not here to run the foundation, and you're not here to keep the pharmaceutical industry honest." "That's morbid." "That's planning. I want to make sure this continues, that the work we're doing outlasts us." She turned to look at him. "I'm setting up an endowment, $50 million, to ensure the foundation operates in perpetuity, and I'm establishing the Daniel Hayes Chair in Medical Ethics at 3 major universities. Full professorships dedicated to teaching the next generation about speaking up and questioning authority." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Olivia, that's necessary. You changed my daughter's life. You changed my life. You're changing the entire medical industry by refusing to stay silent. That deserves to be remembered and continued long after we're gone." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me design the curriculum. Say you'll make sure we're teaching these kids the right things. Say you'll keep being the pain in the ass who won't let corruption slide." Daniel laughed through the tears in his eyes. "I can do that." The years passed. Sophie graduated high school and went to college, eventually medical school, driven by a desire to be the kind of doctor who paid attention and questioned and cared more about patients than prestige. Ava went into healthcare advocacy, founding organizations dedicated to patient safety and medical transparency. They were both living proof that surviving trauma could become motivation to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. Daniel stayed at Bennett Biotech, continuing to strengthen safety protocols and support whistleblowers. The foundation expanded internationally, helping medical professionals in 12 countries speak up about dangerous practices. The endowment Olivia had established ensured the work would continue for generations. On his 50th birthday, Daniel stood in the same storage unit where he'd kept his old research equipment during the janitor years. He'd never gotten rid of the space, using it now to store files from particularly complicated cases the foundation had handled. As he organized documents, he found the old janitor uniform stuffed in a box in the corner, gray shirt with his name badge still attached, worn pants, the uniform that had made him invisible for 3 years. Daniel held the shirt up, remembering the man who'd worn it, scared, defeated, just trying to survive. That man had thought his life was over, that his career was dead, that nothing he did mattered anymore. That man had been wrong. The janitor had saved a child's life. The janitor had exposed a conspiracy. The janitor had changed an entire industry. Not despite being a janitor, but because being invisible gave him access and perspective the prestigious people never had. He'd seen what was really happening because nobody thought to hide it from someone they considered nobody. Daniel folded the uniform carefully and put it back in the box. He didn't need it anymore, but he wasn't ready to throw it away either. That uniform represented the lowest point of his life, but it also represented the moment he'd had to choose between staying safe or doing right, and he'd chosen right despite the cost. That choice defined everything that came after. Years later, sitting in his office at Bennett Biotech on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Daniel received an email from a young pharmacy technician at a hospital in Minnesota. She'd noticed something strange in medication orders.
discrepancies that didn't add up. She didn't have authority to investigate and was terrified of speaking up.
But she'd read about the Ava Bennett case and the foundation Daniel had helped build. She was asking for help.
Daniel immediately wrote back, assuring her that the foundation would support her, protect her, help her expose whatever corruption she'd found.
He gave her specific instructions on documenting everything, on who to contact, on how to stay safe while pursuing the truth. As he hit send, Daniel realized this was what it was all about. Not the awards or recognition or prestigious title. Not the salary or the nice apartment or the security he'd rebuilt. It was about making sure that the next person who noticed something wrong didn't have to face it alone. Didn't have to choose between staying silent and being destroyed. Didn't have to wonder if speaking up was worth the cost. Because it was always worth the cost. Always. Even when you lost everything, even when it destroyed your life, even when nobody thanked you for it. Doing the right thing mattered not because it made your life better, but because it made someone else's life possible. Daniel had learned that lesson the hard way, standing in a hospital room at 2 a.m, looking at a dying child and making the choice that would change everything. He'd been nobody then. A janitor with a mop and bucket, invisible to everyone who mattered, but invisibility had been his strength. Because while nobody was watching, while everyone assumed he didn't matter, Daniel Hayes had paid attention. He'd noticed what the prestigious doctors missed. He'd cared when the important people were too busy to care. He'd acted when every rational reason said to stay silent. And a child lived because of it. That was the only measure of success that truly mattered. Not wealth or fame or professional redemption. Just one life saved, one person protected. One small corner of the world made better because someone noticed when everyone else looked away. Sophie called that evening as Daniel was packing up to go home. She was in her final year of medical school now, about to start her residency in pediatrics. "Dad, I got my residency placement, Children's Hospital in Boston." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm going to be a pediatrician, just like I said I would when I was 8 and watched you save Ava." Daniel felt pride swell in his chest. "You're going to be great at it. Because you taught me what matters, not the prestige or the money or the title. Just paying attention and giving a damn when everyone else is too busy or too scared to care." After the call ended, Daniel walked out of his office and took the elevator down to the lobby. The evening shift of cleaning staff was arriving, pushing their carts and preparing for the night's work. Daniel nodded to them as he passed, and several nodded back. They knew who he was, the former janitor who'd become an executive. Some of them looked at him like he was inspiration, proof that invisible people mattered. But Daniel knew the truth. He hadn't mattered because he became an executive. He'd mattered when he was a janitor paying attention in an empty hospital room at 2 a.m. That's when everything changed. That's when one person's decision to speak up instead of stay silent saved a life and exposed evil and proved that courage doesn't require power or prestige or position. It just requires noticing when something's wrong and refusing to look away. Daniel drove home through the city streets, thinking about the young pharmacy technician in Minnesota who was probably terrified right now, wondering if she should report what she'd seen, thinking about all the other people in hospitals and companies and institutions who noticed corruption and abuse and stayed silent because they didn't think they mattered. They did matter. Everyone mattered. The janitors and technicians and assistants and interns who saw things the powerful people missed. They were the real guardians of ethics and safety. If only they'd realize it. That's what Daniel tried to teach now. That's what the foundation existed to prove. You don't need authority to make a difference. You need awareness and courage and the stubborn refusal to let evil hide behind respectability. At home, Daniel made dinner and thought about writing another article for the medical journal, about the importance of paying attention, about how the most dangerous corruption happened in plain sight while everyone assumed someone else was watching, about how change often came from unexpected places, from people nobody considered important. Because Daniel Hayes had learned something important during his journey from respected scientist to unemployed janitor to the man who saved Ava Bennett's life. He learned that what you do matters more than who you are, that integrity beats prestige every time, that the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't authority or wealth or connections. It's one person who pays attention when nobody's looking and refuses to stay silent when speaking up costs everything. That person could be anyone. A scientist or a janitor or a pharmacy technician in Minnesota who just noticed something wrong. The title didn't matter, the courage did. And courage, Daniel had learned, wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what needed to be done despite being absolutely terrified. It was looking at a dying child and a murderer in a white coat and choosing to act even when every rational reason said to stay invisible and safe. Daniel finished his dinner and sat in the quiet apartment, grateful for the ordinary moment, for safety and stability and the chance to do work that mattered, for a daughter who'd learned that doing the right thing was more important than doing the easy thing, for a second chance he'd never expected and still didn't fully believe he deserved. But mostly, Daniel was grateful that he'd paid attention that night in room 14, that he'd noticed the chemical trace everyone else missed, that he'd investigated when he had no authority to investigate, that he'd spoken up when staying silent would have been so much easier. Because Ava Bennett was alive. She was thriving, helping other people, making the world better because someone had noticed she was dying and refused to look away. That was enough. That was everything. That was the only thing that truly mattered in the end. One life saved by one person who paid attention when nobody else did.